Alaska was supposed to be our escape, a place where Sharon and I could rebuild what was left of our shattered lives. But this frozen wasteland has only amplified the darkness between us. Out here, the cold is the least of our worries. Trust has become a deadly weapon, and every move we make feels like a step closer to the edge. Survival isn't just about battling the wilderness. It's about staying one step ahead of the betrayal that lurks in every shadow. This is my story. Enjoy watching it. After saying goodbye to Mom and Dad at Yosemite, I drove north on Interstate 5. I crossed the border into Canada just north of Seattle and continued my journey toward Alaska. Dad and I had talked about starting a small flying business back in Texas and other places. I could have found a spot for that in Texas, but big airlines had lots of smaller companies handling passengers and goods from rural areas, which made it tough. I didn't want to be a commercial pilot. I unfairly thought of them as just bus drivers in the sky. I wanted to fly small planes to places that few people visited, but I also wanted to make money doing it. Alaska seemed like the best place to do that. In Alaska, I got a job right away. I needed to because everything was very expensive there. I started flying small planes for a company in Anchorage. Frederick Simpson owned 6 otters, which he used to take small groups of people to remote villages and transport goods. Working with Mr. Simpson was perfect for me. I was getting better at flying and learning about running a small business, too. They say time heals all wounds, but I think it can help cover them up. The last couple of years had been tough. I found my wife with her boss and his wife, and even though I moved past the anger and hurt, the way our marriage ended still affected me. I often wondered what could have been with Mercedes and me, and to a lesser extent with Stephanie, but time was helping me to set those thoughts aside. Many of the memories still stung, but I was learning to accept things as they were. Nearly a year after arriving in Alaska, I had another birthday and had settled into a routine of flying almost every day. I just turned 31 years old. My dad used to say I was old enough to know better, but still young enough to take chances. I wasn't sure what he meant exactly, but it felt fitting. I flew a rugged old de Havilland otter up to a new place on the north slope of Alaska. I was taking 9 tourists to a tiny village called Barron. Some people thought it would be a great spot to see huge caribou herds, a coastline filled with ice year-round, and oil drilling further northeast. I didn't really understand why anyone would pay to see that, but they seemed to want to. Maybe it was just something different. This village had a restaurant that served sandwiches and soup for lunch. The furniture looked new and comfortable, but the food was a bit questionable. Still, since they were the only place to eat in this company town, I had to go there. I was eating what they called a chicken salad sandwich. I wasn't too sure it was actually chicken. I hoped the onion soup next to it would taste better. "May I sit with you, please? All the other seats are taken." I looked up, happy for the distraction. It was a young woman I had brought to Barron a few days ago. "Of course, Miss Kincaid, please join me," I said, standing up until she was seated. Having company always made lunch more enjoyable. Sharon Kincaid seemed a few years younger than I was, maybe 27 or 28. She had an average look, not overly pretty, but not plain either. She might look nicer if she wore a little makeup. She was about 5'5", and from what I saw as she moved, I guessed she had a nice shape under her loose clothes. Some of the clothing she wore was due to the chilly winds outside, which seemed to stick around even in summer. But it also looked like she preferred to wear baggy, shapeless outfits. I wished she'd choose something more flattering. Her legs looked very long, and I liked women with long legs. "Sharon," she said as she settled into the straight-back chair across from me. "Sharon, then," I replied. I stood up slightly and looked around as if checking for anyone listening. "Okay, no one is nearby," I whispered playfully. "You can call me Matt," I said with a teasing smile to show I was joking. "Smart Alec," Miss Kincaid, Sharon, said wisely, studying her sandwich as if trying to figure out its ingredients. "Wow," I said. "We only spent a few hours together on the flight, and now in just a few minutes. You really get me." She shook her head and rolled her eyes at my joking. But I saw a small smile on her lips, which brightened her face and eased some of the tension I noticed there. I liked that. We chatted at first about our sandwiches and the mysterious soup, but soon we moved on to other random topics. Her eyes started to warm up as she relaxed. They were a beautiful hazel color. She was the first woman I'd met with that eye color. Very nice. She had lovely hands, too, well-shaped and gentle. After lunch, since neither of us had any plans and nothing urgent to do afterward, we took a long walk around the site, ending back at the dining hall just in time for dinner. Overall, the day was enjoyable for me, and I hoped for her, too. I didn't notice her trying to avoid me during those hours. We seemed to have a good connection. I felt happy about it. After Mercedes and Stephanie went back to their dance group in Philadelphia, I had gone out a few times, but nothing special had come from those dates. The next morning, Miss Sharon Kincaid and I met for breakfast. We spent most of the day talking and exploring a small area in North Slope, Alaska. It was a nice time, and I enjoyed learning more about her. Her eyes sparkled as she spoke, and her warm smile was lovely to see. That evening, since it was Saturday, there was a dance at the resort's restaurant. Most of the tables and chairs were moved aside, leaving space for dancing. A DJ played music with a sound system that wasn't the best. I arrived late to the dance. I was preparing to fly the de Havilland the next morning and had spent hours checking everything to make sure I had the right navigation maps ready. Good pilots pay attention to many details before taking off. When I got there, I was surprised to find Sharon sitting alone at a side table. I wondered why she wasn't dancing. There were plenty of men in the room, and someone should have been asking her to dance. "Hi, Sharon, can I sit here?" I asked. I had a hint of what her answer would be by the way her face lit up when she saw me coming. She straightened in her chair and waved toward the empty seat. I liked her smile. She should smile more often. It made her eyes shine. She really looked wonderful. She wore a blouse and slacks. Skirts just weren't a thing here. Her long, slender legs were covered by the slacks, but she finally had on shoes instead of boots. I caught a glimpse of her delicate ankle, and she looked lovely. I ordered a Diet Coke instead of a beer because I had a flight in the morning. I didn't want any alcohol in my system. Sharon and I spent most of the evening dancing, taking short breaks to chat while we sat at the table. Mercedes and Stephanie were great dancers, and they had taught me a lot of basic steps during our time together. After a few weeks, I became pretty good enough to hold a lively woman in my arms on the dance floor without feeling out of place. Sharon and I moved well together. I felt confident dancing with her. It was wonderful just to be close, so when the DJ announced that the night was coming to an end, I was really surprised by how fast the time had gone. I could feel a frown on my face, and I knew she noticed. She seemed pleased that I didn't want the evening to end. Hand in hand, we walked back to the little cabin where she stayed. After she unlocked the door, she turned, and I hugged her lightly, as if we had done it many times before. We shared a moment that felt warm and special. When we pulled away, she looked at me with a thoughtful expression, showing a mix of feelings. "You know they call me the Ice Bitch Princess, right?" she said, clearly not happy about the name. I hadn't heard that before, and I couldn't understand why anyone would say that about her. I held her close, my hands resting on her waist. Looking into her eyes, I searched for something I couldn't name. I saw warmth there, maybe a hint of sadness and loneliness. I understood her feelings. I felt the same way. "Well," I said quietly, "no one who called you that really knew you, did they?" We shared a nice moment together, and it felt important. I finally pulled away, remembering to respect her space. "I have to go now," I said after a bit. "I need to rest. We have a flight tomorrow." She nodded and smiled at me before letting go. I smiled back and turned to leave, wondering if she was still watching as I walked away. As I made my way to the hangar where my small room was, I thought about how I could have gotten closer to her if I had stayed. But I knew I needed to be careful and respect how she felt. I realized I really liked her and didn't want to mess up what was growing between us. I was almost asleep when I remembered I had called her honey, and she hadn't seemed to mind. The next day, we took off at 9:18 on our way to Fairbanks, flying about 400 miles. The plane I was flying, an Otter, could fly a bit more than 500 miles when fully loaded, so we were all set. There were 10 of us on board, including me. The de Havilland was set up as a float plane. It had wheels underneath each float, allowing us to land on regular runways or water. I hadn't been flying float planes for long. Mr. Simpson wanted a more experienced pilot. But in the end, he chose me. Luckily, he wasn't too disappointed. I actually enjoyed landing on water, even though it could be just as tricky as landing on land if something went wrong. Sharon Kincaid was my co-pilot for the journey back home. I had asked her to join me, hoping she didn't mind that I walked away last night. She seemed okay with it. She smiled happily and climbed into the co-pilot's seat easily. She looked around the cockpit with interest, her face full of excitement. I wondered how I had missed this side of her before. After I got through my typical greetings to the passengers, Sharon and I chatted on the intercom for quite a while. The rest of the group didn't have headsets, so they couldn't listen in. Our conversation was relaxed and easy, which felt really good. I missed this kind of connection since Mercedes and Stephanie had left. We were flying under VFR, which means I could see the horizon clearly. I could tell if we were upside down, tilting, or level. A thick layer of clouds was high above, blocking the sun, and the land below looked just like every other wild stretch of Alaska. Around noon, I started to feel uneasy. Fairbanks is just a little south of the Prudhoe Bay area, and we had been flying that way long enough that we should be nearing Alaska's second-largest city. But there were no signs of it. My worries grew stronger. We should have been hearing radio communication and maybe even seeing planes coming in and out of Fairbanks. But the guard channel was silent. The visibility wasn't great, so I wasn't too worried about not seeing any planes, but it was still odd. Fairbanks, November Yankee 1905. I called to the Fairbanks controller, hoping to reach someone. There was no reply. I tried 2 more times before giving up. I moved my seat closer to the control column and studied the instruments carefully. When Sharon noticed I was worried, she placed her hand on my arm but didn't say anything. I took her hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. I kept holding her hand, and she didn't try to take it away. She didn't distract me with questions I couldn't answer. That was another thing I appreciated about her. Then something caught my eye. One of the instruments blinked. It happened so fast that I only saw a flash. I leaned closer to the panel and tapped the cover of the attitude indicator. To my surprise, the little plane on the screen spun around wildly for a few seconds before settling down. I felt a lump in my throat. My body and a quick look outside told me we had not just rolled upside down, but that's what the instrument showed. I tapped the GPS compass, and the display whirled too. Amazing! Some of my instruments were clearly not giving the truth, but I had no idea which ones to trust. The engine was roaring nicely, which was a relief, and the controls responded well to the pedals and yoke. This old plane was all mechanical. No electronics involved. I checked the circuit breakers. Everything looked fine, but who could tell? I thought about turning the breakers off and back on, but I remembered that sometimes when you turn off a part that isn't working well, it might just stop working altogether. I leaned back in my seat. I didn't know what was wrong, but something was definitely off. "Sharon," I said over the intercom, "we're in a tough spot. Can you get everyone's attention back there, please?" To her credit, she did just that, turning in her seat and waving to the other passengers. When some didn't notice her, she raised her voice to make sure they paid attention. The girl spoke loudly, and I was thankful for my radio headset. I pulled back on the throttle until I felt we were about to start a slow dive, even though my altimeter wasn't working well enough to confirm it. Reducing the speed made it quieter, allowing me to speak to the people in the back seats. I turned in my seat as much as I could, but the control column, rudder pedals, and instrument panel made it difficult. "We are in trouble!" I shouted, pausing between each word to ensure everyone understood. It caught their attention right away. The mood was tense. "My instruments have failed. I can't tell which way we're going, whether we're going up or down, Oregon, how fast. Nothing. That means I don't know where we are." Suddenly, we saw sunlight again. I turned back around. We had come out from under a large cloud and could finally see the horizon. We were flying straight into the sun. Given the time of day, that meant we were flying east. Also, I could see a big range of tall mountains appearing ahead of us. I instinctively turned right and adjusted our direction to what felt like southwest. The sun usually doesn't rise directly in the east, especially at this latitude, and it doesn't set perfectly in the west either. Still, seeing the sun gave me a rough idea of our direction. Making even a quick change felt much better than continuing on the wrong path. "Okay, we just found out we've been going east and we should have been going south," I yelled to my passengers. "I still don't know where we are, but now I've got the plane heading towards cities and towns, so we're working on our problems." and we really were doing that, sort of. Alaska has a low population density, and the area is not very populated. Once, an Air Force KC-135 from Eielson Air Force Base, close to Fairbanks, crashed about 7 miles from the runway. No one had ever gone to the remote valley where the plane went down, even though it was just a few miles from Alaska's second-largest city. Traveling southwest from our location was a lot better than going east into the cold wilderness of northern Canada, but it still didn't get us to a comfortable hotel room in Fairbanks right away. Even though I was flying slowly, we would soon run out of fuel. That meant I needed to land this old de Havilland somewhere before the engine stopped working. I preferred to land safely instead of crashing. I adjusted my microphone. "Sharon?" I called to get her attention. "Yes," she answered quickly, looking my way. I noticed she seemed calm. "Can you take what I say for a moment and pass it along to the others so I can focus on flying?" I asked. "Of course," she responded. "Go ahead." "All right. Tell them we will be out of fuel in about an hour. Make sure they know it's not happening right now. We have some time. Then please ask everyone to look out the windows. We need to find a nice paved runway, but I think that might be unlikely. So if that doesn't work, look for a lake, ideally a spot with calm water where I can land safely, okay?" She didn't reply right away. I realized I might have sounded a bit too friendly, and I guessed she may not have liked that. "Okay," she shouted to the back of the plane. "Matt says we don't have enough fuel to reach our destination, so everyone needs to look for a place to land, either on a road or maybe on a lake. Everyone keep an eye out for a good spot, understood?" That made sense, and I figured the others would understand it better. I reached out and she took my hand. We held on to each other for a short moment. The engine rumbled steadily, showing no signs of stopping. It had taken us southwest, but I had no idea how far we had gone. After about an hour of realizing we were in trouble, my worry was growing. I began to feel more anxious about running out of fuel, and fast. I was making quick guesses about how long we had been flying off course, our fuel usage, and many other things I wasn't sure about. The fuel gauge showed we were running low, but I couldn't be sure if it was working properly, just like the other instruments. I figured we would need to land soon. The only question was whether it would be a rough landing or a smooth one. I reduced the speed even more to save fuel. We began to glide down gently. "Over there!" someone shouted. I could hear them above the noise of the engine, but I didn't know who it was. "Where's there? What direction?" I asked sharply. Sharon passed my questions to the others. "To the left," she replied. "A little behind us. Around 7 o'clock, you know what I mean?" "Got it," I answered. "Nice way to explain it." I was really glad Sharon Kincaid was with me. I turned the plane in a wide left curve, careful not to make any sudden moves since we were flying at a low speed. As we turned, a small lake slowly came into view right in front of us. It was about 7 or 8 miles ahead, hidden by mountains until now. "Thank you to whoever spotted it. Great job staying alert," I told Sharon. She passed along the thanks and the compliment. We flew over the lake. I had to push the throttle and make a sharp turn to the right to avoid flying too close to the mountain that had kept the water from our sight earlier. Then, I slowed down and did a gentle flyby. The lake looked beautiful, truly stunning. It was a highland lake, clear and surrounded by tall trees, maybe pines or firs, I wasn't sure. It was a lovely, untouched area around this small, oval-shaped lake. The water was crystal clear and I couldn't see anything under the surface. That was a good sign. Nothing to damage the floats when we landed. I made my decision quickly, as I usually did. "Okay, Sharon, let the others know we're going to land on that lake. Everyone needs to tighten their seatbelts and get ready, okay?" I saw her nod from the corner of my eye. "Okay, everyone," she shouted over the engine noise. "The captain has turned on the seatbelt sign. Please put your seats up and make sure your seatbelt is secure. We're going to land right there. Hold on." I couldn't help but smile despite everything. Sharon was amazing, and I loved having her around, even in a plane that wouldn't be flying much longer. I glanced at her, still smiling, and took a moment to pat her hand. I revved the engine and made another sharp turn, getting ready to line up with the long side of the lake. I lowered the flaps to 15%, making sure we were high enough to avoid the treetops but not too high. I was about 35 feet above the thick forest below. I eased back on the throttle and let the plane drop a little. I set the flaps to 40% and pulled back on the controls to slow us down more. As we flew over the last of the tall trees, I lowered the nose again. The path we were on looked good. We glided over the shoreline at about 20 feet and were coming down quickly. I lifted the nose one last time, just enough to tilt the front of the floats and cut the throttle. We touched the water gently at first, then with a stronger impact as the plane's weight pushed the floats deeper. I reached down to the floor beside me to activate the rudders on the back of the floats, and suddenly we were a de Havilland boat instead of a plane. I felt it was the best water landing I had ever made. We slowed down fast. I looked around from my left side window and forward, but there was nothing to suggest we were in any danger. When I asked Sharon to look out her side, she didn't see any problems either. There was a lot of cheering and clapping behind us, and Sharon turned around in her seat to join in. She shared the excitement with me. We were all thrilled to be down and safe. We didn't have to worry about crashing now as long as I avoided the occasional floating tree trunks. I let the engine run softly, intentionally slowing our speed so I could see better. Finally, I spotted a small inlet to my left. It led to what looked like a pebbly beach about halfway up the cove. Moving slowly, we glided into the narrow waterway, and a few moments later, the front of the floats scraped softly a few inches up the rocky slope. We had come to a stop. I turned off the engine and then turned to hug Sharon. I held her close with warmth and relief. She smiled, and I held her just a little longer. She smiled back. I didn't want to stop talking with Sharon, but I had things to do. I opened my cockpit door, stepped down onto the left float, and took a short braided rope with an anchor from a storage bin. I attached the rope to one of the landing gear supports and walked to the front of the float, being careful to avoid the hot engine exhaust. From there, it was an easy jump onto the rocky shore. The pebbles felt wet, likely from the floats pushing a little water up the bank, but the ground was dry a few feet in. I pulled the rope tight and drove the anchor into the pebbly soil, pushing it down a bit deeper with my foot. The old de Havilland was secure for now. We'd fix it better later. Looking back, I noticed the passenger door was open, and a man was climbing down onto the left float. "Hey there," I called. "Come on out and step onto dry land. Just try not to get your shoes wet." In about 20 minutes, all 9 passengers were on dry land with me. They were stretching their legs and easing the tightness in their muscles. They had their small bags with them. We would get their larger luggage out later. While the others worked out their tightness, I climbed back onto the wing with a dry stick. I opened the fuel valve and dipped the stick into the fuel tank. I sighed, closed the cover, and made my way down from the wing and onto the left pontoon. The fuel barely got the end of the stick wet. "Okay!" I shouted to get everyone's attention. It probably wasn't needed since they'd been watching me anyway. "Okay. Are any of you former Navy SEALs?" I asked, getting a little laugh from a few of the men. "How about Army Rangers, Marine Recon?" I noticed some smiles as they understood my attempt to lighten the mood. "Does anyone have an uncle named MacGyver?" That earned me some blank stares. Tough crowd. "All right, let's talk about what's going on," I said, making eye contact with each one of them. "The bad news is that my instruments stopped working, and I don't know when that happened, so I have no idea where we are or how far civilization is. The airplane batteries are full, but the radio is broken, and I can't fix it. Are any of you good with electronics?" No hands went up. "Okay, does anyone have a satellite phone?" Nothing. Looks like we were on our own. This is the bad news. Now, for the good news, we are all alive, and not one of us is hurt. Second, every bush plane has a survival kit in the tail compartment, and I made sure we've got all the usual gear plus some extra items that will really help us, I explained. We've got flares, a bit of freeze-dried food, and some survival tools, like snares for small animals and gill nets for fishing. Plus, I always carry a .357 revolver out here, and I've got a rifle, too, so we can gather food from the land while we wait for rescue. Everyone thought about that for a moment. I didn't mention that the chances of a rescue team actually finding us were pretty slim. After so many hours flying over endless empty land and seeing nothing but the same kind of desolate scenery, I knew we were way off course. Anyone looking for us would likely start searching along our planned route and a little ways on either side of it. They would have to move slowly. Searching for a small person or even something the size of our plane from high up or while moving fast made it nearly impossible to see anything. I felt certain we were truly lost, like off the map, lost. My plan was to let everyone adjust to the wild for a couple of days and then suggest that we needed to walk out to find help. We kept ourselves busy. We set up 2 anchor lines, took everything useful out of the plane, and explored the area, which kept us occupied until evening came quickly. One of the guys found a nice open spot in the forest about 50 yards from our little inlet where we could make camp for a while. We decided to leave the old plane just where it was. It would be safe. At our new campsite, there was a small spring nearby with cool water. Down a little slope from the camp, we made a simple bathroom by digging some holes in the ground. I sent everyone except Sharon to search for fallen branches and firewood. Sharon and I worked together to clear a spot on the forest floor, getting rid of dried pine needles and other plants. Then we carried stones from the lake shore to make a safe fire pit. In my survival gear, I had a steel and flint fire starter, along with 6 plastic lighters in different colors and 2 larger lighters that were camouflaged. I opened the packages and gave out the lighters, reminding everyone to keep them in a zipped pocket because being able to start a fire whenever we needed would be very helpful. I used the camouflage lighter I kept for myself to start our first fire. We had 2 small, foldable aluminum pots for boiling water and plenty of freeze-dried meals to last us for several days. When the sun went down, it became very dark. There were no streetlights, no glow from a nearby city, just darkness all around us. We were far away from everything. The fire was good, though. It pushed the dark back and created a warm circle of light around us. We gathered around it to talk and bond with each other. We were no longer just strangers on a plane. We were people working together to survive. I decided to start the introductions. All right, if everyone is okay with it, let's share who we are and a little about ourselves. I only know you as names on a list, and you know me as the pilot wearing a cowboy hat. I smiled and took off my Stetson. I'll go first. I'm Matthew Singletary, but you can call me Matt. I'm from Texas, where I was born and raised. I've been flying since I was a teenager. My uncle taught me how to fly. I came to Alaska for the small planes that fly in the wilderness. I used to be a businessman, but I left that life behind and don't miss it at all. I pointed to someone nearby. Hi, I'm Parker Anderson, he said quietly. I'm a Baptist minister from Omaha, Nebraska, he added, then paused as if that summed it up. And in a way, it did. And I'm Michelle Anderson, said the short brunette with a friendly smile sitting next to Parker. I handle everything in Parker's ministry except for the sermons. This made everyone laugh a little, and both Michelle and Parker smiled warmly. It seemed like a joke that only the 2 of them understood. The others told me their names. April and Ryan Delaney came from Waycross, Georgia. Ryan had a small business helping the logging industry, while April worked as a hostess at a nice restaurant. Lyle and Penny Martin were from Albuquerque, New Mexico. They both worked in banks. They met when Penny was a cashier and Lyle was a loan officer. Spencer and Wendy Carlisle owned a popular river rafting business in Colorado. I'm Sharon Kincaid, she said when it was her turn. I live in Anchorage and I mostly help charities when I can, she explained. People call me the Ice Bitch Princess, but that's not really me. I just choose my friends carefully. She looked around at everyone. I think I'm going to like all of you. No silly people here. She smiled, but her eyes didn't show much happiness. After saying a few more things, she became quiet. I glanced at the others, then looked up at the sky. The stars were shining like tiny diamonds in the dark. Okay, let's see which way is north, I said thoughtfully. There's the Big Dipper and there's the little one, and that star at the end of the handle is the North Star. We need to mark. Sharon was pulling a long, straight branch and laid it down near the campfire. I grabbed a shorter stick and marked small lines in the dirt, showing east and west. In the morning, we would know a bit about where to go for help. After chatting for a while, I collected some small branches to make a pile for my sleeping bag. Sharon walked back to the fire-lit circle and watched me as I set up my gear just a couple of yards from her tent. I had a sleeping bag meant for really cold weather in my survival kit, but I didn't have a tent. Everyone else, every couple plus Sharon, had their sleeping bags and a light tent from their trip to see the caribou. I wasn't too worried about missing a tent. The tall trees around us would help keep any rain from falling directly on me. "What are you doing?" Sharon asked with a hint of amusement in her voice. Oh, the branches and leaves will keep me off the ground and be softer than just dirt, I said. I know that, Sharon responded a bit sharply. I have some under my sleeping bag too, she pointed out, which is inside a tent, she added. Don't be silly. Get in the tent where you'll stay dry and can sleep well. Oh, I'll be fine, I said. The trees will block most of the rain. There won't be any rain inside my tent, Sharon said smoothly. Her face was lively, and even in the dim light from the fire I saw that she was a bit flushed. Her eyes were wide, showing she was dealing with something she found frustrating. With her soft hair blowing in the gentle breeze, she looked really nice. Yes, dear, I replied with a smile. She let out a small laugh, but it didn't sound mean at all, and there was a little smile on her lips. I picked up my sleeping bag and walked to her tent, stuffing it inside. It was going to be a snug fit, but we'd manage. I sat on a fallen tree branch to take off my boots. Sharon already had hers off and crawled inside. As I started to follow her in, my sleeping bag flew back out. Hey, I said. It wasn't the smartest thing to say, but it was all I could think of. Don't need it, Sharon replied quickly. We'll be warmer close together, she said firmly. What she said was true, but in early May in Alaska, it wasn't really going to be cold enough to worry about. And there's no space to put your sleeping bag in here, she added. Looking inside, I could see she was right about that too. Yes, dear, I said softly. I heard that, she replied playfully. I know, I said, smiling back at her. I crawled into the tent to find her sleeping bag covering the whole floor. I blinked in surprise. She held out the clothes she'd worn all day. Could you please hang these somewhere? She asked nicely, not showing any signs of my surprise. I had to close my mouth. I took them without saying anything and hung them on a nearby branch. They were still warm from her body. And Matt? She called just as I was about to crawl back in. Yes? You should hang your jeans and that shirt outside, too. It works better if we're close, you know? She said in a soft voice. I did remember that heat traps better when shared, like with thermal blankets. I wasn't sure if it was the same with sleeping bags, but it seemed like a good idea. I took off my jeans and shirt and stood in the dark in just my boxers and socks. It got chilly quickly, so I climbed into Sharon's tent. I slipped off my socks and put them outside before zipping the entrance behind me. Turning around on my knees, I saw Sharon lying on her back. Shouldn't you wear? I started to ask. Have you ever worn something tight all night long? She wondered. No, I haven't, I replied quietly. She lay comfortably, creating a soft curve at her waist. Come to bed, Matt, Sharon said plainly. I did, sliding into the sleeping bag. Sharon pulled the edge of the bag over us as she turned toward me. She snuggled closer and adjusted the bag to keep us warm. We spent a few minutes sharing soft kisses. I had one arm under her neck and the other around her shoulders. You know, she said softly, you could have spent the night here if you had said the right words like, want to have some fun, or something like that. I wasn't sure what to say, so I chose to be honest. I want our first time to be special for both of us, and when we both feel ready, I replied quietly. Sharon propped herself up on her elbow and looked into my eyes in the soft light of the rising moon. She seemed pleased, kissed me gently, then settled back with a contented sigh. We slept in each other's arms and woke up in the same position, and then I got more kisses. Hey, Matt! What do you want me to do with this big box? Spence called out. He liked to be called Spencer, but everyone just called him Spence. He was at the back of the Otter, trying to find anything useful from inside the airplane. At first I didn't understand what he meant. Then I saw him lifting a large package from the last seat in the passenger area. It looked heavy. I adjusted the pistol on my hip. Many people in Alaska carry guns openly, but I was still getting used to it. I have no idea, I yelled back to Spence. Bring it out and let's see what it is. I remembered seeing the package lying in front of me. My boss had asked me to deliver it to a friend working at a drilling company in the Anwar oil reserve. When I tried to reach him from the resort, I found out he had gone home 3 days before I arrived. I was bringing a box back to Anchorage, but now it seemed it would never make it there. Inside the box, we found white bars of soap and some toothpaste. We split everything up and put our share into our backpacks. On our second day, We got more used to our little spot in the wilderness. Reverend Anderson, who asked us to call him Parker, loved fishing. He took charge of the gill nets from my survival gear and caught us a lot of fish for dinner. In fact, he caught enough to feed several people, so we didn't need to touch our freeze-dried meals that night, and we all felt satisfied. Sharon and I shared her sleeping bag and tent again that night. None of the married couples seemed to notice that the two single members of the group were getting along well. It was a comfortable setup for both of us. The next day was our third one away from civilization, somewhere in Alaska or maybe northwestern Canada. It started out like our second day, but everyone was beginning to feel restless. At lunch, which was more fish cooked on flat rocks in the fire, I brought up the topic I had been avoiding for 2 days. I told them we probably wouldn't be rescued because we were too far from any search area. Then I suggested that we might need to help ourselves and hike out of the mountains to reach help. This was met with understanding. Everyone was smart, and they all seemed to realize the truth of our situation. In fact, things went so well that I didn't have to persuade anyone. We started dividing up our gear and putting it into our backpacks to see how much we could carry for a long hike. I was the only one with a big backpack. The others had smaller day packs they had used on their trip to see the caribou. Because of this, I would be carrying more than my fair share of the group's stuff. But my big backpack was built to spread out the weight, so it would likely be just as comfortable to carry 50 or 60 pounds in it as it would be to carry 25 pounds in their smaller packs. As I was lifting my pack, getting ready to put it on my back, I suddenly heard a loud scream from the camp behind me. I quickly turned around, shrugging my arms out of the straps. That scream was filled with pure fear. You could recognize it right away. I dropped my pack, undid the strap holding my gun in the holster, and pulled it out as fast as I could. There was a bear just beyond our camp, a huge grizzly, really big, about 8 feet tall on its back legs and weighing maybe 800 or 900 pounds. It was casually walking through the camp, moving between Sharon's tent and the Delaney's bright one until the scream made it stop. The bear stood up tall, sniffing the air, and it seemed to dislike the smells it found. Clearly, it was not happy that we were in its space. Everyone near the campfire began to move to safety quickly. The bear seemed nervous about the fire and wandered away from it. This path brought it right toward me, and I didn't like that at all. Holding my gun with both hands, just as I was taught, I started to shoot, aiming for the bear's head. If I hit it anywhere else, it would likely keep coming, no matter what. Shooting at the bear's head didn't help much. It felt like bullets bouncing off a big tank, which only made him angrier. He opened his mouth wide and let out a loud roar, and that was my only chance. I had heard that you could stop a bear with smaller bullets if they hit the right spot. I aimed for his open mouth. I needed to hit him just right to make him back off. His head was moving, though. Even from less than 30 feet away, it was hard to aim straight. He took all 6 shots from my pistol, and I quickly stepped back, opening the cylinder to find the loose bullets I had shoved into my jacket pocket. Suddenly, Sharon pushed the rifle from my survival gear toward me. She took my pistol at the same time. The Remington 700 is a bolt-action rifle, so I couldn't shoot it as quickly as my pistol. But when a .300 Magnum bullet hits something, it causes serious damage, even to a huge bear. The bear didn't like the first shot that hit the top of his head, or the second one that chipped some bone off his forehead. The magazine only had 3 rounds, so instead of trying to hit his mouth, I aimed for his chest. The shot made him stagger. He stumbled, swiped at his wound, but then kept coming. I dropped the magazine. I didn't have another one ready. There was a spare in my backpack, but I worried we didn't have time to grab it. I would have to load the bullets into the magazine I had and hope the bear would back off while I did that. Sharon handed my revolver back to me and took the rifle. I needed to close the distance, so I stepped forward a few paces. The bear noticed and turned to face me. I wanted the bullets to travel upward, so I knelt down on the forest floor. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted Sharon next to me, holding the rifle ready. She must have found the extra magazine in my pack and reloaded it. I needed to take my time, aim carefully, and remember to squeeze the trigger gently. That's what they always say. I was doing my best while the big brown bear struggled to move forward. I was convinced that the bullet over his heart would take him down, but it wouldn't happen quickly. My third shot landed right at the upper gum line. The bullet did its job as it hit him. The grizzly collapsed, lifeless, just 12 feet away from where I was kneeling. About an hour later, we decided to leave our campsite and not come back. I suggested it, and everyone agreed without hesitation. Everyone got to work breaking down the camp right away. The bear had been bleeding for some time. My earlier shots hadn't finished him off, and he had sprayed blood everywhere. Now there was a pool of blood and mess around him from the rifle shots. I thought about how predators and scavengers would come from far and wide to feast. That idea stayed in all our minds. We took down the tents and packed them up like we had practiced before the bear showed up, securing them on the tops of our backpacks. All our other gear was packed in the backpacks or tied to the outside. Without looking back, we started walking in a general southwest direction, heading toward a well-known peak in the distance. We kept going until the sun started to set in the west. We took a break for an hour, built a fire, and boiled water from a creek using our metal buckets. We mixed the hot water with our freeze-dried meals. After we ate, we put out the fire and walked for another hour. As it got darker, it became harder to see where we were stepping and which direction to go. We cleaned up in the creek as best as we could. The soap we found in the plain made us feel a bit better and lifted our spirits. There was a small hill not far from where we wanted to go, so we climbed to the top to set up our tents. None of us wanted any animals getting too close to us tonight. We gathered enough wood for the fire and made a big one. We didn't really need the heat. We just wanted a bright area in the dark woods. When I climbed into the tent, Sharon was already resting. Neither of us spoke. We lay down next to each other and shared a moment of quiet understanding. There was a connection between us, something real that acknowledged the fear and relief we both felt. We held each other close, sharing warmth against the cold night. In that hug, we found a brief moment of peace, a chance to forget, even just for a little while, the dangers outside the tent. It was a bond formed through our shared experience, and we didn't need words to express it. We were alive, and that was enough. As the night went on, we stayed close, finding comfort in each other's presence, until sleep finally took over. Soon we were enjoying each other's company, sharing moments that brought us together. When we settled down, Sharon pulled the corner of her sleeping bag over both of us, and we nestled against each other, her warm breath on my chest as I breathed in the soft scent of her hair. Toward dawn, Sharon gently woke me up. When we both woke up, she leaned on me, and that was how we fell back asleep. "The sleeping bag is not ready yet, so we'll share yours tonight," Sharon said with a playful smile the next morning. "But mine is just a bit bigger than a regular one. It's not a double like yours," I pointed out. "So?" She laughed a little. I got her point. We didn't try to avoid each other while we slept. And yes, her bag really did need some fresh air. We weren't the only ones needing fresh sleeping bags that morning. Apparently, all the other couples in camp had also spent time enjoying their company. We were all a bit tired, but everyone seemed happy as we shared smiles. We heated some water from the creek in our 2 metal buckets, each holding about a gallon, and mixed the hot water with cooler water to wash off the previous night. This started a routine that we kept during our time at camp, doing our best to stay clean. The soap we found in the package from the plane was a huge help. Cleaning up took a little while, but it felt good. Washing up also led us to another new way of being. We didn't worry about being modest. After all, living so closely together made modesty hard anyway. Plus, we still felt the effects of the bear attack, and we were not going to just forget about it. We had to dig holes for waste, and whenever someone needed to go, we made sure another person stood nearby for safety. We thought it was needed, and we didn't discuss it much. Modesty took another hit when we realized we didn't want to sleep in the same clothes we wore all day. We tried to change into something more comfortable before settling down for the night. Changing clothes each night meant that in the morning we would put on clean shirts and pants outside the tents. All of the tents were short, lightweight hiking tents and barely had enough space for 2 people lying down. There was no room to change inside, so we got dressed in public. We all had some extra clothes with us and washed dirty ones in the river, but that only helped so much. We never heard any complaints from Reverend Parker Anderson, our 27-year-old resident theologian. In fact, he and his wife Michelle were doing the same things we were. I liked Parker. He never seemed upset about our situation and was always ready to talk to anyone who needed a lift. I asked him if I could call him Padre, since I had read that chaplains on Navy ships in 1-2 were often addressed by that title, no matter their religion. Parker was fine with it, and soon everyone in the group called him Padre. It just felt right. The day after the bear incident was our first full day on the trail, hiking from a place we didn't know towards safety and civilization. We had hurried all afternoon before, trying to get as far away from the dead bear as possible. We succeeded, but many of us had sore legs and aching backs that first morning on the trail. We probably didn't cover 10 miles that day, even though we were moving for 12 hours. It was relatively easy, walking alongside a river for most of the way. That was a relief. We needed the easy path for a bit until we got our strength back. We were lucky that we were all in decent shape for a normal group of men and women, but our everyday lives before this adventure had not included long hikes. It took us a few weeks to get used to the hard work of being outside all day. We climbed hills and walked over rocks along the riverbank. After 3 weeks, we had settled into a routine. We began to see each other's strengths. Penny Martin, who worked in banking with her husband, was a former track athlete. She had kept running as an adult, so hiking all day was easy for her. If she wanted to, she could have outpaced all of us every day. Her husband, Lyle, loved fishing and helped set up the gill nets. Together with the Padre, whenever we were near water, they caught fish for us to eat, thanks to their skills. Ryan Delaney turned out to be the best cook in our group. He took charge of cooking meals with whatever Lyle and the Padre brought back from fishing or any game others caught. As we walked, we also collected berries and wild onions to add to the meals Ryan prepared. I was the group's hunter. I had a Remington rifle and would wander off to try to catch a deer or moose for our meals. At the start, I only had 30 bullets for the rifle and had already used 3 on a bear. So, I used the rest very carefully, making sure to get as close to my target as possible. Sharon took on the role of camp guard. She usually carried my .357 Magnum to help people get to the latrine we dug, or to keep an eye on those gathering berries, and she watched over anyone who needed to go somewhere. Everyone found a way to help with our shared goals. A month into our journey, I was out front with the rifle, hoping to find something good to add to our dinner. We wanted to try smoking the leftover meat to take with us, so I was also searching for a spot with plenty of firewood. I was following one of the many game trails that seemed to lead everywhere and nowhere. As I moved down a slope, I spotted 2 deer about 100 yards away. They were focused on a rock, seemingly licking it. Since I was moving against the wind, they had no idea I was there. I stayed low and moved quietly. Suddenly, the larger deer lifted its head and looked around. I froze, worried I might have startled it. Crouched behind a small rock, I could see him clearly through my scope. I knew exactly where to aim. The big deer took a few steps toward me and glanced around. I took my time, breathing slowly. I lightly squeezed the trigger. The sharp sound of the rifle rang out through the mountains. The big buck fell without a struggle. The smaller deer bolted away. I could have aimed for it, but we didn't really need more meat, and I didn't want to waste my limited ammunition. I walked down the slope to the fallen deer and looked at the area. The rock they had been licking was a few feet away and untouched by any blood. Then it hit me. I remembered something from a long-ago TV show. Just like people, wild animals need salt, but they can't find it easily in the wild. Instead, they lick the minerals and salt from natural sources. We ended up using our knives to scrape off the parts of the rock that the deer had licked, and we used a hatchet to break off bigger pieces. We could see that there was a lot of leftover minerals in the soil around us, but we decided to leave them there. We had enough minerals that were cut and ground to give everyone about 1.5 pounds or 2 pounds to carry. We didn't really know how much we would actually need, but it seemed smarter to take more than to run out. It made everything our cook, Ryan Delaney, made taste even better. The salt added extra weight to everyone's load, but we accepted it because it was worth it. For a while, we had been trying to lose weight from our packs. Sharon and I were sleeping under a rain cover that used to be over her tent. This helped us avoid carrying the tent and its cover. We had left my sleeping bag behind and were sharing her larger one to lighten our load even more. Everyone else was doing the same approach. We kept the ammo for my 2 guns, a couple of changes of clothes, and now the salt, but everything else was optional. We were becoming a small, close-knit group of hikers traveling through the wilderness. "Do you have something to share, Matt?" Sharon asked softly as we sat together in the cool twilight one evening. 3 little words, maybe? She teased. We had been getting closer and talked almost all the time. Sometimes we forgot others were around and spent an hour each night in quiet talks. Well, I thought. Oh, I know. It's going to rain? Oh, no. That's 4 words. I looked out at the light fading under the rain cover. Oh, I know. It is raining. Yeah, that's 3, I said playfully. We were sitting close and I was leaning against her. Try again, she encouraged. Oh, I just don't know, I said, rubbing my side where she nudged me. Well, there is... no, I can't say that. What? She asked, sounding impatient. I was just thinking, I could say I love you, but you already know that. It might not be what you want to hear. I'm not sure how, but she turned to look at me so quickly. Say it again, she urged softly. I love you, Sharon Kincaid, I told her. I love you, I said again. I cherished these moments. They felt special. Why didn't you ever say that before? She asked. Why didn't you? I shot back, passing the question to her. Because the boy has to say it first, she giggled. You can't say I love you first? I asked, surprised. Nope, she said firmly, shaking her head. It has to be the boy. Well, I said it now, I pointed out, but you haven't said it to me at all. She pressed her lips to mine. I love you, Matthew James Singletary, she replied softly. I love you so much. We didn't speak much for a while, but we understood each other perfectly. Soon enough, she was cuddled up against me, resting on my chest. I have 4 more words, I said gently. They follow those 3. What are they? She asked sweetly. Well, let's see. How about I love you and will you marry me? Sharon was a strong woman. The past few weeks together had only made her stronger. After a moment, her eyes sparkled with happiness. You could just say yes, I suggested. Yes, honey, she whispered. Yes now and forever. Would you marry me tomorrow? If we could, I asked. Yes, she murmured in my ear. I turned my head as far as I could to the right. Hey, Padre, I called out. Yes, Matt, he replied. Can you marry someone without a marriage license? I asked. He paused for a moment. Well, I guess so, and I think you'd be married in the eyes of God, but the state of Alaska might think they should charge a fee for it. I'll pay the fee when we reach the next town. How about that? Okay, Padre agreed. Right after breakfast, I said. I knew he could hear the smile in my voice. About time, someone chimed in. I think it was Spence Carlyle. Then there was a soft sound. His wife, Wendy, was a lively woman who didn't mind reminding Spence to be polite sometimes. Early the next morning, after a breakfast of leftover deer from the night before, the Padre led a small ceremony bringing Sharon and me together. We stood high on a ridge, looking out over a river valley with snowy mountains in the background. It was truly a beautiful view. I gave Sharon a wedding ring I had made with my pocket knife from a small piece of pine. It wasn't fancy, just a token. She seemed to appreciate the gesture. We continued our journey, mostly heading southwest. Every night we would check the North Star and plan our route toward a big landmark for the next morning. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into a month, then 2 months and more. We kept walking. I couldn't say how many miles we traveled. We often had to go around steep rock faces we couldn't climb, or find a safe way around mountain slopes, or look for a place to cross rivers. It was always something that slowed us down. In mid-August, after our plane was forced down in early May, we reached another wide river. It was too deep to walk through, so we needed to build a raft and either paddle or pole ourselves across. We had already done this twice, so we knew what we needed to do. We just needed to find some logs to make the raft. Logs are heavy. Carrying them is hard work. We needed to find a spot where the forest was close to the water so we wouldn't have to carry our gear very far. I turned my back to the river and looked at the trees behind us. I almost thought we would have to move either upstream or downstream when Sharon gasped. She rushed behind me and started digging in a pocket on my backpack. "What are you doing?" I asked. She didn't answer. She opened the zipper, pulled something out, and ran toward the riverbank. I turned to see what was happening. Out on the river, not far from us, was a boat, about 20 feet long with bright blue and gold colors that belonged to the Alaska State Troopers. The person driving the boat likely noticed us. We were right there in view, but I wanted to make sure. I took out my .357 and fired 3 quick shots into the air behind us, hoping the loud sounds would catch his attention. Sharon was also working to get noticed. She pulled out the flare gun I had been carrying since we left the float plane at the lake. She pointed it toward the patrol boat and fired. The bright red flare shot out right toward the boat. The driver noticed us and the flare. The gunshots alerted him to our presence, and the red flare showed him exactly where we were. He waved and turned the boat toward the bank where we stood. Then he saw the flare wasn't going up like it should, and realized it was heading straight for his boat. He watched as it came closer. At the last moment, he ducked down to avoid being hit. The flare missed the boat by a few feet, but he couldn't know that when he had to decide what to do. "Hey, stop it!" he shouted when he surfaced again. "I see you! Just give me a minute to get over there, darn it!" Everyone standing by the river laughed. It felt nice to finally share a laugh after everything we had been through. I hugged Sharon tightly, feeling both relief and happiness. The Alaska Wildlife Trooper, that was his real title, made a long call to his supervisor using his satellite phone. Trooper Adams shared all our names with his base and explained what had happened while I guided him. He got the headquarters to send a big helicopter to take us all back to Fairbanks. It turned out our journey from the wild to the town wasn't as difficult as we thought. Even if the trooper hadn't found us when he did, we would have eventually reached roads leading to small towns. Those roads were just a few days' walk across the river. That felt good. We were just an ordinary group of people, but we had done something amazing. We had saved ourselves. During our trip, Sharon told me her father had money, but I didn't know how much, and I hadn't asked. It wasn't important to me, or to her, either. It seemed her father was quite wealthy, and his properties were useful right away. For example, he owned a large, nice hotel just outside Fairbanks. After the state troopers were satisfied with a quick report about how my plane had to land and how we reacted, we got a ride from a friendly secretary who lived in the direction of the hotel. When we walked into the lobby, we quickly realized we didn't quite belong there. Our worn clothes were a bit tattered, and we could tell we didn't smell fresh. It hadn't been a big deal on the trail since everyone else smelled pretty bad too, but here in the fancy hotel lobby, we really stood out. We hung around for a moment, trying to figure out how Sharon could connect with someone in her father's business world. It was the 2nd day of September, and we had been missing, presumed dead, for almost 4 months. We didn't know how to tell everyone that we were back and ready to start our lives again. Sharon solved that problem quickly. She spotted a tall woman in a dark gray business suit and white blouse walking from a bank of elevators to our left, followed by a group of other business people. "Teresa!" Sharon called out. "Teresa! Over here!" Teresa didn't even look our way. She heard Sharon. I saw a few people in her group glance at us, but the woman in charge didn't respond. That upset Sharon. "Teresa Cunningham, you need to pay attention to me," she shouted. That got a response. The woman in the business suit turned around, looking surprised, and eventually noticed a frustrated Sharon. Her mouth dropped open in shock. She held out her phone to a guy behind her, expecting him to take it. He caught it after a few fumbles. Teresa walked over to us, and Sharon met her halfway across the lobby where they shared an emotional hug. I followed more slowly. The two women were very happy to see each other. Sharon tried to explain our long journey back to civilization, but the words were hard to say through her tears. It wasn't going smoothly. I touched Sharon's arm and she turned to me. "Honey, Teresa's always been a really good friend to me," she said warmly, then turned to Teresa. "Terry, I'd like you to meet my husband. Terry, Matt, Terry." I held out my hand. "Nice to meet you, Miss Cunningham." "Cunningham?" I said, remembering Sharon had just called her that. The woman seemed a bit surprised. She looked back and forth between Sharon and me several times. "Sharon? Husband? Oh, when? How? Where did—" Sharon decided to help the woman out. "Terry, we have a lot to talk about, but right now, could you get us a room? We're really tired and could use a shower." "Or 2, I added. Sharon took my hand and smiled at me. "Or more," she said playfully. "Oh yes, please," Teresa replied, clearly flustered. "Simon," she called to a group that had been walking behind her in the lobby, "put Sharon Kincaid, put Mr. Kincaid's daughter and her husband in the penthouse, now!" Simon appeared to be the hotel manager or someone in charge because he hurried over to the check-in desk, talking quickly to the staff. Moments later, he returned with a key card for us. He led us to what seemed to be the special elevator, swiping the card in a device on the wall so the door would open. The elevator stopped on the 15th floor, and Simon guided us to tall double doors that opened into a large suite. Inside, Sharon and I chose one of the 3 sofas in the sitting area, which was a step down below the main floor. Miss Cunningham sat on a sofa across from us. I felt a bit uneasy since I had been sitting on hard surfaces for months. I promised myself I would get used to being comfortable again. "Riza," Sharon started. It seemed she and Miss Teresa Cunningham had been close before everything changed. "Riza, Matt and I, we tried all our credit cards, but they've all been canceled. And I think Matt has a few $20 bills that got wet, but I don't have any cash at all. Could you check with Uncle Cal and see if we could get a couple of company cards until we can get our lives back together?" she said with a little laugh. "Oh," Sharon added, "and I need to call Mom and Dad to let them know that their daughter is back." Teresa blushed bright red. "Of course, sweetie, I'm sorry. I've just been so surprised I can't think clearly." She seemed a bit embarrassed that she hadn't remembered those things already. "Here, sweetie." She handed Sharon her phone. "It's not locked. Your parents' numbers are saved in there. While you talk to them, I'll call Cal and start getting things moving, okay?" Sharon took Teresa's phone and looked through the contacts until she found the number she wanted to call. That left me and Miss Cunningham standing there, unsure what to do next. We exchanged glances for a moment. Teresa Cunningham was a decent-looking woman. I guessed she was in her early 40s. She was tall, with dark eyes and calm, peaceful features. Her black hair, cut to about shoulder length, framed a nice face. I could tell she was a senior executive. The way people treated her showed her confidence. I leaned slightly toward her while Sharon was trying to reach her mom. "Miss Cunningham." I started. "Please, just call me Teresa," she replied. She had a warm smile, too. "Then I'm Matthew James Singletary, to be exact," I said, returning her smile. "If I might ask, is there any way Sharon and I could get a line of credit or something at the shops downstairs? We really need some new clothes, and we'll pay it back as soon as we can." "I'm sorry, Matt. I'm just so surprised." She got up and walked to a small table near the door, picking up the phone there. "This is Miss Cunningham," she said as she spoke to the person at the front desk. "Do you know who I am?" "Good. Should I ask for Simon Humphrey, or can you get things done?" "Great. Please ask Mr. Charles and Miss Reardon to come to the penthouse right away. Also, could you arrange for lunch to be sent up for 3 people? Make sure it's something big with plenty of food, okay?" She looked at me with a curious smile. "Big portions for at least 2 big eaters," I joked with a grin. "And lots of drinks, just not water." She smiled back and seemed to relax a bit. She gave her last instructions to the person on the phone. "Yes, that's all for now, thank you," she said, finishing her call. She pressed the button again and listened for a second before starting to dial another number. "Donna," she said firmly when the call connected. "Is Cal there?" "Yes, please interrupt the meeting. This is really important." "Yes, I'll wait." It was only a moment. "Hey, Cal, if you're not sitting, you should sit down. You won't believe it. Sharon Kincaid is alive," she said to someone named Cal on the other end. "Definitely," Miss Cunningham replied with excitement. "I'm here in Fairbanks, in the penthouse suite with her, and her husband right now. Yes, her husband." She glanced at me and smiled tightly. "I don't know, Cal. There are so many things I'm not sure about what's going on right now." She looked at me again. "Temporary credit cards, maybe some cash in advance," I quietly suggested. She nodded in agreement. "Cal, can you help set up a couple of corporate cards for Sharon and her husband Matt Singletary to use until their personal cards are ready?" "Yes, Singletary. Matthew Singletary. Perfect. And could you send them by courier? That should solve it." "Oh, Cal, can you call Should I tell Kincaid the news? Sounds good." "No, that's enough for now. Thanks a lot, Cal. Bye." "Hi, Mom," Sharon said into Teresa's phone. There was a long pause. "Mom." She waited a moment and then moved the phone away from her ear. She looked at the screen with confusion. "Mom?" She asked again, then sighed loudly. "Hello?" She looked at me, clearly confused. "She picked up," Sharon explained. "But then, nothing. Hello? Yes, Jenny, it's Sharon. Yeah, we all just came out of the mountains after the plane trouble." She passed out, Sharon added in a whisper while she listened to the voice far away. I was about to say something about her comment when she waved her hand at me and stuck out her tongue with a smile. Since we had returned to civilization, I was getting more annoyed when people talked about it as a crash, because that wasn't exactly what had happened, and Sharon knew it was bothering me. I focused back on Teresa Cunningham, who was watching me. So, Miss Teresa, I corrected myself. What do you do for Mr. Kincaid? I asked. I'm a consultant of sorts, she replied. I travel to Mr. Kincaid's different businesses and provide help with management. This struck a chord with me. I nodded, understanding. That sounds a lot like what I did in another time, I said. My boss called me his paladin, his problem solver sent to uncover the wrongdoings and find out who was taking what from the company. I smiled. Really? Teresa said politely. We should sit down and share stories sometime, she joked. She clearly saw me as someone she could relate to. That was nice. I had been curious about how I would fit in with Sharon's friends. Teresa might still be feeling shaken after the surprise of seeing Sharon back, and wasn't quite in control of her feelings yet. She could still turn out to be a tough businesswoman. Mom! Sharon shouted. Yes, it's really me! No, I'm actually fine, Mom. We're here in Fairbanks at Dad's hotel. They're taking good care of us. She started to feel annoyed, but then her mood changed. Yes, I have someone I want you to meet, she said, smiling. When you get here, Mom, you'll really like him. After talking for a bit longer, Sharon ended the call. She looked around, feeling cheerful. Mom's going to find a flight to come here. She's in Florida, and she's not sure when Dad will be back. What is Dad doing in Tierra del Fuego, Teresa? She asked, looking confused. I have no idea, Teresa replied. We'll just have to ask him when he gets back, she added. The two of them got comfortable and started chatting, catching up on everything since Sharon began her adventure on the North Slope. I listened for a while. Okay, I finally said. I don't know about you two, but I feel like a nice, warm, soapy shower is calling my name. I smiled and stood up. Oh, me too, Sharon said cheerfully. Wait for me, she exclaimed. Teresa, she said, turning to Miss Cunningham. My husband and I are going to wash off a few months of dirt, and it might take us some time, okay? She looked at me for a moment before focusing back on Teresa. And if we find anything interesting under all that mud, we might take a little longer, okay? She said. I'll order lunch to be delivered in, Teresa replied, checking her watch. How about exactly at noon? That'll give you almost 2 hours to clean up. Sound good? I checked the wall clock and gave Teresa an understanding thumbs up. I hurried to catch up with my wife, who was heading to the big bathroom. I arrived just in time to help pack away clothes we wouldn't wear again into plastic bags we found in the closet. We could burn them later. A little after noon, Sharon and I came out of the bathroom wearing soft, white robes. We noticed 2 big trays filled with food and drinks on the table near the balcony door. A couple of young interns, Charles and Samantha, were standing nearby, as Miss Cunningham had called them. Sharon and I invited Charles and Samantha to join us, and soon, the 5 of us, including Teresa, were enjoying big sandwiches and cold bottles of soda. This was a feast Sharon and I had only dreamed about while coming down from the mountains. Charles and Samantha were interns, just like us, and they probably wished for a meal like this too. Teresa assigned Charles and Samantha to help us, and they did a fantastic job. They quickly found out where my parents were and their phone number, something I didn't remember. I had Mom and Dad saved in my old phone contacts, so all I had to do was press the green phone icon to call them from my now inactive phone. Officially, Sharon and I, along with the others in our group, were considered gone. Once the system declared us dead, it was very hard to get back on the right side of things. I spoke to my surprised parents and asked them to come to Anchorage. They had to find a place to park their large RV before they could leave. Teresa even upgraded their tickets without me knowing. Teresa took it upon herself to act as our guide, doing small things like upgrading my parents' tickets. Overall, anything Charles and Samantha couldn't handle, Teresa took care of. She pushed through many mid-level managers at the Kincaid business, making sure things got done. She had a team of lawyers from Kincaid working on fixing records of our group's deaths in whatever system needed updates. In just a day and a half, I had a new phone with all my contacts back from the cloud. I was again a licensed pilot with the federal government. My Alaska driver's license was renewed, and my bank accounts and credit cards were back up and running. I was all set. They even arranged for tailors to visit and measure us for new clothes. I complained a bit. First, I could pay for what we needed myself. Second, even if I wasn't allowed to buy things, I didn't think tailored jeans and shirts were necessary. Besides, Sharon and I were both going to gain some weight again since we wouldn't be hiking up and down mountains every day. No one really noticed me, but they were polite about it. Teresa also organized for everyone in our group to have a full medical checkup. We spent our second day back in the real world at a hospital, where we had every part of our bodies checked and evaluated. At the end of the day, we were told we were very healthy, which we already suspected. After that, everyone else went home to resume their routines. I went home with Sharon. Sharon and I sat in two hard plastic airport chairs, chatting softly and enjoying each other's company. I'm sure no one could tell we were in love. Well, maybe it was a little obvious. We didn't really care what anyone else thought. We were at the Anchorage International Airport, having flown in from Fairbanks. Now, we were waiting for Sharon's mother to arrive. Judith Kincaid had a tough time getting to Anchorage. Her husband's private plane was in use by a businessman in Europe, so it wasn't available. Every other flight in that direction was fully booked. Finally, she managed to get a standby ticket in Miami. She went to everyone in the waiting area who had confirmed tickets to Seattle. She offered $10,000 and tickets to anywhere in the world to anyone willing to switch with her. A family of 6 from Galveston accepted her offer, and after a quick chat, they changed their plans to fly to California and Disneyland instead of Seattle, where they were originally headed. I thought that was a good choice. At least Judith's plane had arrived and was waiting on the tarmac. I could see it on the screens showing flight information. I was really excited. This was going to be a happy moment. I was trying hard not to feel nervous. Sharon was beside me, whispering about how much I would love her mom, her sisters, and her brother too. Then I spotted a tall, attractive woman with gray hair coming down the escalator, looking around. She seemed to be searching for someone. I noticed her eyes land on Sharon, and then on me. I quickly waved to get Sharon's attention and nodded towards the woman who was almost at the bottom of the escalator. Sharon saw her and jumped up from her seat, rushing across the airport to greet the woman. They embraced warmly, and it was clear that Judith was very happy to see her daughter. I took my time walking over, giving them a moment to reconnect. Judith looked over at me with a smile as I approached. Sharon had already mentioned to her mom on the phone that she had a husband, so it wasn't a total surprise, but this was the first time they were meeting. I gently placed my hand on Sharon's back as she stepped out of her mom's hug. She turned slightly to create some space between us while Judith and I faced each other. "Mom, this is my husband, Matt. Matt, this is my mom, Judith. But she prefers to be called Judy." "Mrs. Kincaid," I said, trying to sound friendly. I could tell she had a lot of questions about how her daughter ended up with a husband she had never met. "Judy, please," she corrected me with a warm smile, which made me feel better. At least she wasn't angry. "I'm going to keep him around, Mom," Sharon said, "in case I encounter another big challenge." She pointed to the large, stuffed polar bear in the middle of the lobby. The introduction of her surprise husband was a bit stressful for Sharon, too. Judy looked at the big bear and then back at her daughter with a curious expression. She seemed to relax. "I have a feeling there's a story behind that," she asked. Then she raised her hand. "There's our ride," she said as a driver in a uniform approached. "Can we talk more at home?" She walked past Sharon and gave me a friendly nod. It felt like a win for me. My mother-in-law was being welcoming, and I really appreciated that. "So, I hear Matt is the brave knight who saved you from all sorts of trouble?" Judy asked her daughter as we settled into the biggest family room I had ever seen. Sharon and I were sitting together on a couch, while Mom Kincaid had her feet tucked up under her on another nearby seat. Judy was really enjoying the story we were sharing. I was glad when I chose tea over coffee, and I think that earned me a few more points too. I really wanted my drink in a big mug instead of a small cup, but Judy liked it anyway. "He is my hero, and he did save the day," Sharon said happily, holding onto my arm. We were sitting comfortably with some soft music playing and having a nice chat. "Wait a second," I said. Judy, you need to know that your wonderful daughter was right there with me when that bear came towards us. I was trying to scare it away with my gun, and Sharon found a bigger one and brought it to me, walking right toward the bear. When I used all the shots in my gun, she handed me the bigger gun and started getting the other one ready again. By the time I was done with the big gun, she had the little one all set. She gave it back to me and handed me more bullets for the big gun. I shot 3 more times at the bear, and your brave daughter was right there, aiming the big gun until the bear finally ran away. So if there was a clumsy knight in this story, there was definitely a brave princess, too. Sharon put her hand on my cheek and turned my face toward hers for a moment before looking back at her mom with a happy smile. "My husband," Sharon told her mom in a very pleased tone, giving my leg a gentle pat. We talked for hours, sharing stories of our adventure, how many mountainsides we climbed, how many rivers we crossed in little boats or waded through when they were shallow, and how we got married one beautiful morning while nature woke up around us. Judy had to wipe away tears when Sharon shared that. She came over to our sofa and hugged her daughter. They both had a touching moment together. "Thank you, son," Judy finally said. "Thank you so much." Then she moved around Sharon and hugged me tightly. "Thank you for bringing my daughter home, Matt." "Well, I guess we sort of found our way back home together," I said roughly. Judy gave my hand a gentle pat. "I understand. You two are a great match. It's clear you care a lot about each other, and no one could ever doubt your feelings." "I really do. I care for him, Mom. I care a lot." Sharon's voice quivered with emotion, and her mother responded with kindness. "Oh, dear," I said, feeling tears start to well up in my eyes. "If you share this moment about me getting all teary-eyed, I'll lose my tough dragon slayer image in this town, you know," I joked, hoping to lighten the mood a bit. Sharon and Judy chuckled, and we slowly let go of our group hug, which made me feel relieved. "I hope you both know that everyone I know will hear about your adventure and how you faced that bear, and how much you care for each other. Before long, the whole state will know," Judy promised. "Oh, come on, Judy," I started to say. "Mom!" Sharon interrupted, smiling brightly. "Oh, Mom," I said before stopping. Both women looked at me with curious expressions. I just shrugged. "I honestly have no idea what I was going to say," I admitted, letting out a sigh. I completely lost my train of thought. They laughed at me. I was just a guy, after all. We hugged again and then settled down for more tea and stories from our trip. My parents arrived the next afternoon, and Mr. Kincaid was expected soon. Sharon, Judy, and I met them at the airport and brought them back to the Kincaid house, where we settled my parents into one of the guest rooms. Sharon and I were staying in her old room. We spent about an hour getting comfortable and sharing a few stories. Judy was eager to tell everyone about her encounter with the bear, and she captivated the room with her tale. I had to step in a few times when Judy stretched the truth a bit too much, but she told the story much better than Sharon or I could, so we let her keep talking. Judy and my mom, Leah, connected right away, and Sharon had my dad smiling within moments. When my mom first met Sharon, she glanced my way, and I could tell what she was thinking. The last time she heard from me, I was ending things with a woman named Mercedes, and clearly this was not her. I knew I'd have to explain later. When Bruce Kincaid walked into the room where we were sitting, I almost expected a fanfare. I could almost hear a cannon salute ringing out in their big backyard. Mr. Kincaid sent his assistants away on errands, took off his coat, and looked me in the eye. He shook my hand, then did the same with my parents before hugging Sharon tightly. It was only then that he managed a smile. At least he cared for her. I had been wondering about that. After greetings and a bit of small talk, Sharon's dad asked, more like told, me to come with him to his study, which was off to the side from the living room. Sharon and I had talked about this and how we would face it together. When we returned, I felt a bit rattled by his overconfidence and belief that he alone knew what would make his daughter happy. He seemed sure a cowboy bush pilot like me was not even someone who could be considered for the role of her partner. I sat back down next to a waiting Sharon and smiled at her. She smiled back with her own bright grin. I nodded. Things had played out just like she had warned me. Mr. Kincaid went to a sideboard and poured himself a drink, then settled into a comfortable chair by the fireplace. "So, how did it go?" Sharon asked loudly. They offered me $250,000 to leave Anchorage on the next plane and never come back, I said. Kincaid looked surprised. I wasn't supposed to share that. Daddy, Sharon cried out, you only offered him that much? She covered her eyes, looking shocked. I'm really upset. Are you upset? She asked, turning to me. She suddenly stopped acting sad as if she had never been. I am, I answered seriously, nodding firmly. Daddy, she said with a frustrated tone, looking back at her father. How could you? A small $250,000? Don't you care about me, Daddy? She pouted. I'm worth much more than that. You need to offer Matt at least $10 million or even $20 million. What were you thinking? Kincaid's mouth dropped open. He tried to get back on track. Sharon wasn't going to let him off the hook. She stood up and walked over to him. Her face showed she was serious now. Daddy, she said firmly, let's be clear. You can accept that I'm going to be with my husband for the rest of our lives, or you can have the ice bitch princess back, making your life and your friends' lives a nightmare, she said, pointing her finger firmly at her father's chest. What's it going to be, Daddy? She asked. Mr. Kincaid looked at all of us. He was smart enough to see that Sharon had planned this whole scene and realized she wasn't letting me go. He knew I had been listening to his offer in the study. Outplayed on his own ground, he decided to give in. Welcome to the family, Matt, he said, raising his drink in my direction. And good luck, he added, but he was beginning to relax and even smiled a bit. Sharon came back to sit next to me. What? She asked, looking confused. Sharon and I had made a promise to help each other. She worried about her temper, thinking she got upset too easily. To help her with this, I praised her whenever she held back a sharp comment or didn't react to things that bothered her. But she had just let her feelings out on her father, and I didn't want to reward that. You were really pushed hard, I whispered, and you didn't hurt anyone. Except for Daddy, Sharon said, speaking to her father again. You want Matt to be here with me. And the new baby? The room fell silent for a moment. I turned to her, surprised. You mean, you're... She nodded and smiled. We got the test results back from our exams this morning, remember? I nodded. Well, mine had a few pages yours didn't, she explained. I'm 3 weeks pregnant. Oh my goodness, I gasped. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. I was keeping it to myself, just in case. Sharon replied quietly. I smiled at her. Then her mother and my mother pulled her away to hug her and say congratulations. I got handshakes and well wishes from my dad and Bruce Kincaid. When the grandmothers were finished with Sharon, I wrapped my arms around her and she hugged me back. After that, Judy sat on the arm of Bruce's chair. Does this remind you of anyone? Maybe you and me? Judy asked her husband while watching Sharon and me. Bruce looked at us for a moment, then shrugged. No, I can't say they do, he said. He got a playful jab in the ribs for that. He pretended to wince a little. Aha! I laughed dramatically. That's where she gets it. Everyone looked at me, puzzled. I always get elbowed in the ribs or pinched or something, I explained. Now I see she gets that from her mother. That got a small laugh. Tensions were calming down nicely after a rough beginning. So, Bruce, can I ask for some advice? I said. Do you think a little discipline sometimes could help with that habit of using elbows when talking? He thought about it for a moment. I'll get back to you on that, he replied with a casual smile. I teased him lightly, but he just chuckled back at me. I was starting to like my new father-in-law, and it seemed he was warming up to me too. My dad had been looking out at the view from the balcony. When he came back, I asked, Hey, Dad, do you think it would help with Mom? Maybe it would work for her little, nudges? Dad raised his eyebrows as he took his seat, shaking his head with a grin. Why not? I asked playfully. Mom was focused on a painting, probably by a well-known artist, and was returning to her chair next to Dad. As she passed by, she gave me a gentle pat on the arm. That wouldn't work for me at all, sweetheart, she said softly. I enjoy it too much, she added, settling down next to Dad. He just shrugged with a smile. Judy suddenly burst out laughing. She tried to cover her mouth, but it didn't help. She likes it too much, Judy cried, leaning against her husband as she giggled. I could feel my eyes widening in surprise. I looked at Sharon. Don't even think about it, she warned me with a serious look. Then she leaned in close and whispered, "I'm pregnant, you know." Her eyes sparkled with mischief. Our marriage in the woods was real in our hearts, but not recognized by Alaska or any other state in the country. To fix that, we had a small wedding ceremony with a marriage license that we had paid for a week later. Neither Sharon nor I wanted a big, flashy event with a lot of guests and stress, but we didn't communicate that well. So, a month after the civil ceremony, we stood in front of the minister at the church where the Kincaids usually went and promised each other the same vows we had shared in the woods with our fellow survivors and our minister. Mother Kincaid had invited 216 guests. Sharon's father gifted us a travel voucher for unlimited flights on one of the biggest airlines in the world, and we took full advantage of it. We only had a few conditions. We wanted to go somewhere warm, no heavy clothing or boots, and the hotel needed to have plenty of hot water for showers and baths. We enjoyed that hot water after months of not being able to wash up properly. Thomas Bruce Singletary was born just a bit short of 8.5 months after we found out we were having a baby, and his sister Judith Leah came along 14 months later. From the moment they were born, they had me wrapped around their little fingers, and they knew it. We decided to wait a bit before having more kids so our first two could get a little older. I was sure that Sharon loved me deeply, and I believed we were truly happy. We were happy until I learned that not everything between a man and a woman stays perfect forever. Sharon was very sick. She had been getting worse for almost a year, a little more every day. The cancer was aggressive. It was taking a toll on her health. She had held on for nearly 4 months longer than the doctors expected. When I brought her back to the hospital this time, we both understood she wasn't going to leave. She was breathing in short, quick breaths. The medicine wasn't helping her much anymore. She was in a lot of pain but was trying hard to stay with me and our 2 children. But the pain was too much. I got up from the hard chair next to her bed and leaned over my wife, who I had been with for just a few years. I gently touched her lips. I wasn't sure if she could feel it, but maybe. For a moment, her breathing calmed a little, but then it became weaker. I leaned in close and whispered in her ear, "Sweetheart, I will always love you. Our son and daughter know you love them, and they love you back. We will love you forever. You don't have to hold on any longer. It's okay to let go. I promise to take care of Tommy and Judy. Don't worry, we'll be all right." I kissed her forehead again and stood close, stroking her arms and face gently. After a few moments, she breathed out softly and didn't take another breath. The machines nearby started to make a loud sound, but they were saying something I already knew. My Sharon was gone. Feeling tired, I stood up straight and leaned down one last time. I touched her hand and stepped back from the hospital bed so the doctor and nurses could come in. I turned to face Sharon's parents. I hugged Judy and then Bruce. I moved aside so they could go to the bed and say goodbye to their daughter. Through my tears, I looked for the way out. I left to find our son and daughter. I needed to find a way to tell a 3-year-old girl and her 4-year-old brother that their mother wouldn't be able to hold them anymore, that she was now up in heaven and would always watch over them. I felt lost in my sadness but wanted to be the best parent I could for my 2 little ones. That meant helping them cope with their loss while managing my own feelings and not letting the sadness take over our lives. I started to dislike Anchorage and, by extension, all of Alaska. My in-laws lived there and we had a strong bond, but there were just too many reminders of the past, places and moments that Sharon and I had shared. Like hurt animals looking for a safe place, my kids and I moved back to Texas. There, we wouldn't be reminded daily of what we had lost. Bruce and Judy, my children's grandparents, were not pleased with my choice, but they understood. They had the means to visit us in Texas whenever they wished. After Sharon passed away, I received money from a trust set up by her great-aunt when Tommy was born. I didn't want the money and tried to return it, but my in-laws refused to take it back, and the great-aunt had passed away. So suddenly, I found myself with a lot of money. I decided to use it wisely and set up 2 trusts, one for each of my children for their education or whatever path they choose in life. The extra money sat in the bank, growing over time, far more than we would ever need. Back in Texas, my parents decided they no longer wanted to travel around the country looking for the perfect RV spot. Now they planned to enjoy their time exploring during spring and fall, as they believed that summers and winters were not the best seasons for travel. They welcomed me and their 2 grandchildren home with big smiles. Mom and Dad already had a 2-bedroom house on the north side of the city and a cabin in the hills. They sold that house and moved to a bigger one with 4 bedrooms, suggesting that Tommy and Judy might want to come visit sometime. Mom and Dad seemed happier than I had ever seen them. They got to spend time with their grandchildren often and began to spoil them a lot. They said that was their job as grandparents. It was what they were meant to do. I had just turned 36. I didn't worry about getting older. I didn't feel like time was rushing by or anything like that. I had my son and daughter, and I worked hard to take care of them. Thomas Bruce Singletary was 5, and Judith Lee was almost 4. Things had been tough right after Sharon passed away, but she had been sick for a long time. The long illness felt like a kind of sadness even before she was gone. The kids didn't really understand everything, how could they? But they knew their mom wasn't in pain anymore, and that was a good thing. It didn't make up for the loss, but it helped. I owned a business. Well, I was a partner in a business. Sharon's friend, Teresa Cunningham, and I had similar jobs in the business world, so I asked her to join me in a new project. Together, Teresa and I started a consulting firm that would look at every part of a business and create a report for the owners or managers about what needed to be improved. Teresa handled most of the daily work, only involving me when there was a problem that might change how we were running things. I used most of the money from the trust fund Sharon left me to start the business. I owned 51% of the company, while Teresa and her husband Carl owned the remaining 49%. Eventually, I decided to make it easier for them to buy my share because I didn't want to work too hard. It's not that I was lazy, I simply wanted to spend time with my 2 kids, and that's exactly what I did. One sunny day in Texas, my son and daughter asked me to take them to a fun place that had pizza, games, and rides for little kids. Even though Judy wasn't quite 4 yet, she knew exactly how to put a game token in the slot. She would giggle with joy as the game started, clapping her hands. Only after that would she hop on the ride or start playing the game. Sometimes, I wasn't sure what the games were about, but my kids seemed to know just what to do. That was fine. They were having fun, and that was the most important thing. I sat in a curved booth, watching my kids a few feet away on a merry-go-round. It was a slow ride, and I thought it looked a bit boring, but they seemed to really enjoy it. I helped them climb onto the ride and then came back to my seat to relax for a bit. I was keeping a close eye on everything, ready to protect my children from any trouble. I looked around at the other parents, who also seemed a little bored, as I waited for a special pizza I had ordered instead of the regular buffet pizza. I hoped it would taste better than the ones sitting under the heat lamps. When the ride was over, the kids would come back to help me eat the pizza I got for them, or they could pick something from the buffet. I figured they might choose to go for the buffet instead of the special pizza. I watched them smile and felt happy myself. Sharon was someone we could never forget, but we were trying hard to cope with her absence. It had been nearly a year since she had passed away. "Hey, cowboy," a woman said, "do you have room for a couple of girls there?" I was wearing a cowboy hat. It was beside me on the plastic chair, so the word cowboy didn't sound too strange. But I was curious about why she was. Then I recognized the soft voice. I turned my head to see a beautiful woman and a little girl standing next to me. "Oh my gosh," I whispered. "Mercedes." I suddenly found myself standing up, surprised by the lovely woman with dark hair and bright blue eyes in front of me. She smiled shyly at first, then with more confidence. I wasn't sure if I should hug her. I wanted to, but I remembered her marriage from a few years back. I had read a magazine saying she was getting a divorce, but I did not know if that was true. "Hi, Matt," she said gently. She stepped closer and greeted me with a warm smile. That made my decision easier. I felt the urge to reach out in happiness, remembering our past together. I didn't want to get involved with someone who might still be married, and I assumed she understood my feelings from when we knew each other. Yet, she didn't seem to be acting like she was married. Suddenly, I felt a little tug on my knee. I stepped back from Mercedes a bit and looked down. There stood the sweetest little girl, apart from my own little Judy, of course. I couldn't help but smile at her. She smiled back at me without any shyness at all. "Are you my mommy's friend?" she asked in a sweet voice. I crouched down to her level. I had always thought it was impolite for adults to look down on children, both literally and figuratively. I think I am, I said kindly. She could only be Mercedes' daughter. Are you my friend? She asked. Forever and ever, I answered. Little Mercedes smiled widely and put her small hands on my shoulders. I couldn't help but hug her back. What's your name, sweetheart? I asked. Matea, she replied in her sweet voice, but you can call me Maddie. I was surprised. It seemed like her name was inspired by mine, but was that on purpose? I glanced up at Mercedes. She smiled and nodded, confirming my guess. I felt a little overwhelmed. Mercedes silently gestured, later. To me, I was curious to know how this happened. How old are you, Maddie? I asked, as that's usually the next question adults ask kids when they meet. 3, she said cheerfully. She knew the routine well. Though she struggled to show me 3 fingers on her right hand, she finally used her left to help hold down an extra finger. I stood up and looked around for my kids. Just in time, the ride they were on had come to a stop, and they were jumping off, eyeing me and the 2 new people. I turned to face them as they dashed over, and I crouched down again. Tommy, Judy, I want you to meet some wonderful friends of mine. This is Mercedes, and her daughter, Maddie. The kids stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. I decided to break the silence by suggesting we all head to the buffet for some pizza and drinks. Judy was eager to check out the ice cream machine, but I gave her a look that said to wait. She knew it was risky. She just wanted to see what would happen, like kids often do. Soon, all 3 kids were crammed together on one side of the booth, shoving cardboard pizza into their mouths and chatting as if they were best friends. They started a game of kicking their feet up against the table just to hear the noise. I'm pretty sure people who kick tables don't get ice cream, I said aloud. The kicking stopped right away. While I was trying to bring plates of pizza back to the table for the kids, Mercedes sat down beside me on our side of the booth. At first, there was plenty of space, but she quickly moved closer. Now we were sitting side by side, our elbows touching. I didn't mind at all. I actually liked it, but I didn't get to ask a couple of things, I said. Like, what brings you here and other stuff? I thought this might start a good conversation. I didn't realize others could hear me. How to find you? Maddie shouted, pointing at me. Her words cut through all the noise, clear as day. I was surprised. I don't think my jaw dropped, but it might have. I glanced at Mercedes. Her face was turning a bright shade of red. She wasn't looking at me. Maddie was thrilled by the reaction her words got from the adults. She beamed and kept saying it, bouncing in her seat and making funny faces. My other kids joined in, of course. Shh, I whispered. Eat your pizza. Then we'll get ice cream. Thank goodness ice cream works wonders on kids. They quieted down right away and each took a bite of their slice of pizza. I glanced at a still flushed Mercedes beside me. I smiled, feeling happy about how adorable the 2 girls and 1 little boy were. Just so you know, I started. I've been trying to find you too, but my friend couldn't track you down. You just vanished. You were looking for me? She asked, surprised. She looked me in the eye, her blush starting to fade. I heard you were going through a divorce, I said carefully. I didn't want it to sound like I was following her. I tried to reach you, but I couldn't find a phone number or anything, so I hired a private investigator, but he could only find so much. He lost your trail in, Billings, Montana, I think? She smiled. Well, my uncle runs far. Great-uncle Walter runs far, picked me up there and took me to his home in Wyoming. Maddie and I stayed with him and his girlfriend for a while because Reggie, my ex, was making things hard. We needed to get away to somewhere quiet and out of sight, she explained. It worked, I said, smiling. The investigator I hired said it was like you just disappeared. I'm really glad you came, I continued. How long can you stay this time? Mercedes looked closely at my face, searching my eyes for something. She leaned closer. Until you ask us to leave, she said softly. Instead of answering, I smiled warmly at her, a quiet nod to our past together. 3 pairs of bright eyes were watching us, of course. What's that song? I asked. Until the 12th of never. I couldn't stop smiling. We turned back to the kids who had been watching us the whole time but hadn't interrupted. They were busy enjoying their pizza. It was clear they were hoping for ice cream and were trying hard to behave. Mercedes and I finished the rest of our pizza, each using one hand. Her left hand was held tightly in mine under the table, and neither of us wanted to let go. "Where are you staying?" I asked. I was planning to move her and her friend to the ranch as soon as I could. I hadn't thought twice about it. Mercedes might feel differently, but I believed I could persuade her if she wasn't keen on living with me and my kids. Mercedes laughed softly and glanced out the window. "We just got here. Maddie and I, along with my private investigator, were heading to the hotel down the street when we saw your truck. He recognized it, and I told him to turn in here," she explained, chuckling again. "He's out there in his car, with our bags in the trunk." I couldn't help but laugh. It felt like we were two kids again. I thought it would be harder to reconnect after going our separate ways, but things seemed bright. It was a nice feeling. "Do you want to stay out at the ranch with us?" I asked softly. "You still have?" I nodded. "Sort of. A new house in the same place," I explained. "Can Joe, his name is Joe Conway, put our stuff in your truck?" Mercedes asked, showing she was ready to make plans without hesitation. I pulled out my key remote and pointed it toward the large window. I unlocked the front and back doors and then the trunk. "I only have 2 child seats," I warned her. "That's okay," Mercedes replied quickly. "I brought Maddie's all the way from Cheyenne." She let go of my hand and took out her phone. "Joe, Mercedes, could you please put our things in Matt's truck?" she asked. "In the back part?" she added, glancing at me. "Have him put them in the truck bed," I suggested. Then, an idea popped into my mind. "Tell him we'll pay a little extra for the concierge service, okay?" I thought that was reasonable. Private investigators usually didn't help with carrying bags or putting in car seats. "Daddy?" my son Tom asked. I looked at him with raised eyebrows. "Are Maddie and, Mercedes gonna stay with us?" he finished, glancing toward Mercedes. "I think so," I replied calmly. "Mercedes has been my friend for a long time, and I think Maddie will be my friend too. They can be your friends and Judy's. What do you think?" Tom shrugged. He seemed fine with whatever. "Okay," he said, accepting it all. "Yay!" Judy cheered happily. New friends were great for her. Then she turned to Maddie with bright eyes. "Do you want to ride horses?" Maddie's eyes got wide. "Horses?" she shouted, clearly excited about the idea. She nodded eagerly. The pizza plates were mostly empty, just a few crusts left and a slice of mushroom that none of the kids liked, sitting sadly in the middle of one plate. Ice cream cones were enjoyed until the melting cream was smeared all over their faces as they played new games together. Before he left, Joe had placed Maddie's booster seat between Tom's and Judy's, which I thought was sweet. Tom's seat was still behind me, which he liked best. Judy was easygoing, so everything seemed fine to the kids. They all fell asleep just a couple of minutes after we drove away from the parking lot. I had the new pickup customized with wide, comfy bench seats in the front and back. I looked back to see Mercedes smiling gently at the 3 sleeping kids. With the kids asleep, she unbuckled her seatbelt and moved to sit closer to me. "If that isn't the cutest back seat full of kids ever, I don't know what is," she said cheerfully. I looked in the rearview mirror and had to agree. 3 adorable kids, and 2 of them were mine. "Baby," Mercedes said softly, "I'm really sorry about Sharon. It was so sad." "She was a wonderful woman," I replied. "A great wife and an amazing mother, but she was in so much pain when she passed. It was tough on Judy and Tom, but we had time to prepare, and now we're slowly moving on," I explained. Mercedes touched my arm and gave me an understanding smile. "I have a message for you from Sharon," I said after a moment. Mercedes looked surprised, a bit uneasy. A message from someone who has passed can be tough to hear. I glanced at her. "Well, indirectly anyway," I added gently. I focused back on the road ahead. A couple of months before she passed, Sharon asked all the doctors and nurses to leave. She wanted me to lie beside her on the hospital bed so we could talk without any interruptions. I pointed to a building we were just passing. It was Jesse's barbecue, where Mercedes and I first met. She recognized it right away. "Oh, honey, we have to go there soon, okay?" she said happily. I noticed she called me honey again, just like before we had our time apart. I liked it. It felt wonderful. "We will," I said, giving her a gentle pat on the leg. "We will." Anyway, Sharon told me that when she was gone, she wanted me to find someone to love who would also love me and our kids. She made me promise, I explained to Mercedes. Mercedes looked down, focusing on her hands in her lap. So, I continued, I don't want to push you away, but my wife asked me to love and to let me and our children be loved, if that's not how you see things going. I paused for a moment. If that's not what you want, and it's going to be like before. Stop right there, Mercedes said, pointing at a park up ahead. I managed to slow the car down and pull in without waking the kids. When we parked, a cloud of Texas dust floated past the truck. Mercedes turned to face me. I want you, I care about you, and I'm not going anywhere, she said. I meant what I said. I'll be here with you, right beside you, until you tell me to leave. Understand, Matthew James? You used the L word, I said quietly. We didn't say that last time we were together, even though I wanted to. I know, she replied softly. I wanted to say it too, but if we had, we wouldn't have been able to handle everything else. My voice was low and full of feeling. But this time, little dove that calls at morning, her Cheyenne name, I'm going to say it every day, so if you're not ready for, say it, she urged. I care about you, I said quickly. I care about you. I care about you too, she said with a smile. She leaned her cheek on my shoulder. We sat there for a few more minutes, enjoying the peace without speaking. I put the truck back in gear and we got back on the road. We didn't talk much as we drove. We didn't need to. Our connection, one that had been interrupted years ago, felt like it was back on track. We felt really comfortable with each other and were already making promises to one another. After their nap on the way home, all three kids were full of energy when we reached the ranch. They wanted to do everything at once. The horses nearby were making sounds, which helped us decide what to do first. Mercedes and I took all three children down there with a small bag of apples. The kids fed the horses while I got 2 Shetland ponies ready for riding. I had plans to find another one for Maddie, and I told her this. She was very happy about it. Judy rode her gentle pony around the paddock all by herself. She had only been doing that for a month, and she was quite proud of her progress. I helped Maddie sit behind Tommy in the saddle, and my son took his new friend on a nice ride. 3-year-old Maddie held tight to Tommy's waist while he guided the pony around. After some time, 5-year-old Tommy returned to where Mercedes and I were standing and asked us to move Maddie in front of him so she could see the way ahead. Maddie loved it. She cheered when they rode together. Tommy wasn't sure how to handle Maddie's excitement, but he decided to treat it like he did with his little sister. He accepted her affection, but didn't really show it back. After a while, the kids wanted to go swimming. We took the saddles off the ponies, gave them some water, and brushed them before letting them return to the pasture. I raced the kids back to the house and told them to hurry upstairs to change into their swimsuits. I thought Mercedes might use this time to start unpacking their things. We had already picked out her and Maddie's rooms, while I watched the kids in the wading pool. But she wanted to join us instead. She opened one suitcase to get her and Maddie's swimsuits, and we all went to the wading pool together. Mercedes and I watched as the 3 children laughed and played in the warm sun and water. As the sun started to set in the west, I turned on the grill and cooked some steaks for Mercedes and me, and chicken drumsticks for the kids. I also prepared baked potatoes, roasted asparagus, and other vegetables. After dinner, the kids used their energy chasing fireflies in the backyard. By bedtime, they were showing signs of tiredness. Mercedes and I helped them get ready for bed. My 2 went into the bathroom in my bedroom while Mercedes took little Maddie into the hallway bathroom. This was all part of my plan. I wanted the kids to be completely worn out so they would sleep well through the night. Mercedes and I walked from my children's bedroom door to Maddie's, looking at them as they rested. I had my arm around her waist, realizing we were more than just friends as we had told the kids. I'm pretty sure when the Bible talks about angels, I said, it means a sleeping child. I smiled.
Mercedes nodded in agreement. She moved in front of me with grace and wrapped her arms around me. We shared a moment of closeness, feeling the presence of the 3 little ones nearby. In her room, Mercedes opened another suitcase and got a nightgown before we walked down the hall to what had become our bedroom. We didn't need to talk much about it, we just knew. That night, we enjoyed being together and reconnecting. It felt great, and everything seemed to fall into place. Mercedes woke up just before dawn, put on her nightgown, and went to her bedroom where she still had some unpacking to do. We kept up the act of sleeping separately for almost 3 weeks. Mercedes would wake up early and return to her bed, but one morning, the alarm clock didn't ring. The first sign that there was an issue came when all 3 kids jumped into bed with us and demanded, that someone should get up and make breakfast. They didn't really mind who made the pancakes and sausage, but they needed it done fast so they could watch their cartoons. Mercedes was in her nightgown, and I was in my boxers. We were lucky that we had put on something before we went to sleep. I really didn't want to think about what would have happened if they had found us unprepared. Too many questions. I decided to change the batteries in the baby monitors in their rooms and increase the volume. This way, we would at least get some warning if they came looking for us. After that morning, Mercedes officially moved into the master bedroom with me. To our surprise, none of the kids seemed bothered that Maddie's mom was now staying with Tommy and Judy's dad. They didn't seem to care at all. We thought they would have lots of questions and feel confused. Feeling encouraged by their acceptance, Mercedes and I sat them down to talk about moms and dads. I explained how I wanted to be a dad to all 3 of them, and how Mercedes would be their mommy too. I told Tommy and Judy that their mother was in heaven watching over them, but that Mercedes would be their mommy every day. They accepted this news easily since they already had a good relationship with her. Maddie, whose father had not been around since before she was born, only wondered if I would be her daddy, and if I would still read her stories like we had been doing for the past few weeks. When she heard I would keep reading more stories, and that I would always be around, she was really happy. We thought telling our parents would be hard. We expected they would give us a lot of advice about slowing down and thinking carefully, things like that. We figured there wouldn't be any strong opposition, but maybe a little pushback. Since they lived the closest, we decided to go to my mom and dad's house first. Just moments after Mom and Dad hugged all 3 kids, Maddie, Tommy, and Judy ran off to the backyard. Tommy and Judy wanted to show Maddie the sandbox and swing set that Dad built for them back there. That left Mercedes and me to welcome Mom's lemonade and sit down for the conversation we knew was coming. "Mom," I said after taking a big sip of lemonade, "this is Mercedes." I paused for a moment before saying, "We're going to get married." "I told Matt I didn't really need to be introduced to you," Mercedes added quickly before either Mom or Dad could respond. "We've actually met Leah in a video chat years ago. Matt introduced us then," Mercedes continued. "Do you remember?" she asked my mom sweetly. Mom looked surprised. I thought she might have lots of questions but couldn't get the words out. She looked at Mercedes closely. "Ah, no, honey, I don't think... How about if I was holding up something fun?" Mercedes asked playfully, trying to make everyone laugh. Mom blinked, and then she seemed to understand. "Oh, wow!" Mom exclaimed with a hint of surprise, a blush creeping onto her cheeks. "The girl in the mirror," Dad said with a smile. Dad stood up and walked over to Mercedes, shaking her hand warmly. "Very nice to meet you, young lady," he said, sounding pleased. Dad was clearly supportive of us. He went to the kitchen to get the lemonade pitcher for more refills. When Mercedes mentioned she was half Cheyenne, Mom and Dad were amazed. She shared stories about her dad's adventures and her mom's family history, which really interested my parents. After dinner, when the 3 kids begged Dad to read them stories, it was clear that my parents were just as taken by my Cheyenne friend as I was. No one mentioned that the relationship seemed to move too fast. Our gestures seemed to comfort Mom, letting her know everything would be all right. By the time we finished cleaning up after dinner, Mom and Dad were happily trying to get their 3rd grandchild to call them Grandma and Grandpa. They had no trouble at all. Since Maddie's other grandparents were not really involved in her life, she embraced Tommy and Judy's names without a second thought. A week later, we flew to Philadelphia so Mercedes could introduce me and my kids to her parents. I was really happy to meet them. When I first met Mercedes years ago, I thought it would be great to know her family, and I was right. At first, they were a bit worried because Mercedes had just finalized her divorce a couple of months before finding me. However, they welcomed me and my children with warmth. We had a wonderful time together. I had a feeling that Mercedes had talked to her mom, Fiona, about the 3 weeks we spent together long ago.
It seemed she did it soon after Mercedes left me, because Fiona gave me a big hug before we even met. By the time we were ready to go home, Tommy and Judy had gained another set of grandparents eager to spoil them. Mercedes reached out to her ex-husband's parents to see if they wanted to meet Maddie, but they said no. That was their choice. All 5 of us flew to Anchorage to visit Tommy and Judy's other grandparents. On the plane, all 3 kids had a blast, quickly winning over the flight attendants in first class. All 3 of them enjoyed extra snacks and lots of attention during the flight. While the flight attendants kept an eye on them, Mom and Dad held hands and took a nap. Everything went smoothly with Bruce and Judy, even though I had worried before. They both understood that Sharon wanted me to find a kind place for the 2 kids. They were amazed I had done it so fast, but they welcomed Mercedes without hesitation. Overall, meeting all the family members went very well. Mercedes and I fit together perfectly, like 2 puzzle pieces since the very beginning. After her return, we jumped right back into our relationship, being careful to avoid any issues. We didn't find any problems at all. Feeling encouraged, Mercedes and I decided to get married just 3 months after she and Maddie surprised my kids and me at the pizza restaurant. Being married to Mercedes was a fun and easy journey. We agreed on many things, but we always had new topics to talk about. When we disagreed, we talked about our options and chose a way together. Sometimes I saw things her way, and other times, she saw things mine. The hardest moments were when Mercedes thought about what could have been. She sometimes questioned if she should have focused so much on her dance career. She wondered how our relationship might have been different if she hadn't left to follow her dream. I looked at it differently. First, what happened, happened. It was in the past, and we couldn't change it. Second, we had 3 wonderful kids to love that we wouldn't have otherwise, and there was no way we could ever regret having them. We both understood, even if she didn't want to say it, that if she hadn't stayed with her dance group, she might have regretted that choice later on. Our deep connection from the past might not have lasted, and we might not be together today. Despite everything that happened, we were now married and had 3 amazing children. We were very much in love and enjoyed our family life together. We fit well and took on our roles naturally. Mercedes was a loving mom to all 3 kids, and I was the dad. We worked together to set rules and boundaries for our family. Every day we showed the children what a caring relationship looks like. One fun thing we did was to have date nights for Mercedes and me, often since we were newly married. My parents, Grandma and Grandpa, loved to have the kids over for sleepovers, sometimes even for the whole weekend. When my parents were busy, 2 sisters helped us take care of our kids. Years ago, I sold a horse, Ginger, and another young mare to 2 teenagers named Ingram. They still lived nearby. Amber and Pamela were now in their late teens, perfect for babysitting our trio of wonderful kids, and we hired them often. We paid them fairly, too. The kids usually went to daycare during the week, which I wanted, and Mercedes agreed. We chose a small daycare with a good number of caretakers for each child, ensuring they got excellent supervision. We believed it was important for Tommy, Judy, and Maddie to meet and play with other kids. From what they told us, it seemed like they had a great time. I was sure they were learning how to get along with others and work as a team. Things were going well. Everything felt just right. The monitors above us showed that the 3:18 flight from Philadelphia had arrived, right on schedule. Mercedes and I were waiting by the baggage claim, where the luggage would show up soon. We were waiting for a new dancer for Mercedes's dance school. She told me it was a woman she knew from her dance group who was stepping back from performing. Mercedes had stopped touring after an ankle injury that took a long time to heal. While her ankle got better, it would never be strong enough for the demands of dancing on stage or practicing for hours. Now, she was teaching, and she loved it. I was watching the passengers leaving the airport, checking in for their flights. I wondered why so many people chose to stand in long lines instead of using the check-in kiosks all around. It didn't make much sense to me, but I just shrugged it off. "Hey, did someone say today is Fly Naked Day?" a gentle voice asked from behind me. I jumped slightly and turned to see Stephanie, I said with surprise. "What are you doing?" I glanced at my wife, who was smiling a few steps away. I realized she had planned this. I turned back to Stephanie and welcomed her with a warm smile. Time had not changed how much joy she brought to those around her. "It's wonderful to see you," I said to Stephanie. giving her a friendly pat on the shoulder. "And who's this?" I noticed a little girl peeking shyly from behind Stephanie's leg. Clearly, Stephanie was still as friendly as ever. "This is Daphne. Daphne, sweetie, can you say hello to Matt?" I knelt down to Daphne's level, smiling as I extended my hand. "It's so nice to meet you, Daphne. Did your mom tell you that she and I were friends a long time ago?" The little girl nodded slowly, then smiled big. Without warning, she ran over and hugged me tightly. I wasn't ready for that, and it almost made me fall. I quickly put my left hand back to catch myself. Once I was steady on my heels, I put my hands on her waist and pulled her in for a hug back. "So, let's play a question game like grown-ups do," I said. "How old are you?" She held up 4 fingers with a big smile. "And what's your name?" "Daphne Mercedes Walton," she replied cheerfully. I glanced up at Mercedes. "You know her?" I asked, pointing at my wife. Daphne nodded eagerly. "Aunt Mercedes." "I think Aunt Mercedes could use a hug too, don't you?" I said. The little girl nodded again and dashed over to Mercedes. My wife bent down to lift her, and they hugged tightly. When I stood up, Stephanie walked into my arms and wrapped her arms around me. "I missed you, Matt," she said. Then she joined Mercedes and Daphne for a group hug. Suddenly, a buzzer went off, and the luggage carousel started moving, bringing around everyone's bags for them to collect. Stephanie pointed out her and Daphne's bags as they passed by, so I could grab them and pull them off the belt. Stephanie and Mercedes took a large suitcase each and rolled them toward the exit while I pulled 2 big duffel bags, which luckily had wheels behind me. Little Daphne put on a small pink backpack with bunny designs and trudged along with us to the parking area. I loaded everything into the back of the pickup, got into the driver's seat, and adjusted the way my holster was sitting. The airport wasn't meant to be dangerous, but sometimes unexpected things happen. I started the car and turned on the air conditioning. Mercedes and Stephanie were already having what looked like the beginning of a long talk, while Daphne listened closely. "So where are we going?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "The guest room is ready," Mercedes replied calmly. I had guessed where we were headed. I just wanted to hear it confirmed. At home, Daphne saw Maddie again and met Tommy and Judy, who welcomed her warmly. Tommy did ask if I had any friends with boys, but he seemed okay about it. Soon, all 4 kids dashed outside to the playground we built in the backyard. Mercedes and Stephanie kept chatting, and I relaxed on the deck watching the kids play. "Let's talk," I insisted to Mercedes when she could no longer avoid me. We were in bed, and I leaned over her after a long discussion. "About Stephanie?" she asked, sounding innocent. "Yes, about Stephanie," I replied firmly. "What's happening?" "She needed work. I had a job for her, and she's like my sister, you know that. I care for her and wanted her to work with me in the studio. She agreed to come here, and I want her to live with us so I can have my sister around all the time. Got it?" There was nothing alarming in her long explanation. She had clearly thought it out beforehand. Still, it didn't catch me off guard, but "The last time you brought Stephanie here, it felt like you were trying to push us apart," I said directly. "Is there a reason you want to do that again now?" Mercedes laughed lightly. She seemed completely relaxed as she placed her hands on my neck. "That didn't go very well last time, did it?" she said softly. "You and Stephanie got along really well, and we ended up like a team, right?" I shifted a bit, feeling uncomfortable in bed. "Mercedes," I started, "we're married now, not just living our own lives. It feels a bit careless, maybe. We can't just—" I was sure Stephanie wasn't trying to break us apart, but I knew we had to handle things with care. "Shh," Mercedes softly said in my ear. "Stevie is here to work with me at the dance studio. I care for her so much and want her around. She'll be a good friend for you too, honey. She won't get in our way. Do you see?" I didn't respond right away. I was still thinking about what she said, unsure about everything. Before I knew it, she was guiding me in a way I didn't expect. I never got to ask any more questions. It worked out. Everything went really well. We became like a team again, just like we were years ago, without any complications. Mercedes and I were your regular married couple, and Stephanie was our guest. Well, sort of. For a guest, Stephanie certainly helped a lot around the house. We split up all the chores and any tasks that needed doing. Since we didn't have a working ranch, there weren't many outdoor jobs. I usually took care of those, but the ladies would often join me. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning, Mercedes and Stephanie would take her SUV to the dance studio where they'd teach adult classes. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, they had classes for younger kids after school. I would make breakfast for our 4 children, get them dressed for daycare if I needed to go into the office, or in play clothes if we had a free day. If the weather was nice, the kids would spend most of the morning playing outside. They liked when I was out on the deck where they could see me, and I could watch them as they played. Sometimes they would ask me to play different pretend characters based on their current interests. After an early dinner on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I would take all 4 of them in their dance clothes to the studio, where they would join dance classes with other children their age. Tommy wasn't too excited about the dance classes, but the 3 girls loved learning to dance with Mercedes and Stephanie. Tommy went along with it and even seemed to have fun sometimes. We fell into a routine, but we also made sure to keep things fresh and spontaneous. Mercedes and I started to include Stephanie more often on our nights out. We enjoyed dinners, dancing, concerts, and movies together. We also got a little involved in local charities and community events. We received an invitation to a ball at Kyle Mulvane's home, which was meant to raise money to protect local historical sites. The Mulvanes were well known in our community. I had an invite for myself and one for a guest, and I managed to get another so Stephanie could join Mercedes and me. The event had a dress code of black tie optional. Mercedes and Stephanie wore beautiful evening gowns. Mercedes' dress was a lovely seafoam color, and it looked amazing on her. Stephanie's gown was a striking royal blue that suited her perfectly. I wore a black tuxedo jacket and pants with a white dress shirt and a black bow tie. I chose a cummerbund, which felt comfortable and also helped me carry my personal item discreetly. I thought about leaving it at home but felt safer having it with me, especially for the safety of my family. One of the first things I did after returning to Texas from Alaska was to renew my carry permit. When I walked in with 2 friends, we caught a lot of eyes. The 2 women I was with wore beautiful gowns, which made us stand out. We drew even more attention when we started dancing. Mercedes and Steffi loved to dance. They had performed professionally for years, and now taught dance at their own studio on the west side of the city. They really wanted me to enjoy dancing too. Before I met Mercedes and Steffi, I could shuffle my feet a little and hold on to a pretty woman while she danced. But they helped me learn so much more during their short visit. I thought I was clumsy, but the longer we spent together, the more they encouraged me to try. They had created a new dance step for 2 women and a man. I felt like I was just there to support Mercedes and Steffi and show off their amazing skills. Our dance was based on a routine they had performed while touring. We were always moving, and after practicing for months, I began to feel more confident on the dance floor. I started to have fun with the steps and patterns we created together. It was enjoyable, and I loved being the focus while 2 talented dancers moved around me. It seemed we looked good while doing it too. The longer we danced, the more attention we drew. Without realizing it, we moved closer to the small stage where the band was playing. When the song ended, I noticed the band leader smiling at us and clapping silently. He was signaling me to look behind. When I turned around, I saw that the dance floor around us was cleared of other dancers. People started to applaud for our performance. I bowed to show my thanks, while Mercedes and Steffi curtsied and smiled brightly. We walked away from the dance floor toward the bar. It had been a lot of fun, but dancing with these 2 was tiring. The girls were welcomed into a group of men and women at one end of the long bar. Mercedes and Stephanie were greeted with big smiles and lots of compliments. I decided to help out by going to the other end of the bar to get 2 glasses of white wine for them and a bottle of flavored water for myself. As the bartender finished pouring the wine, I heard a commotion from where I had left my dance partners. "Let's see them! Come on! You've been showing off all night, so now—" I turned around quickly. A short, heavy-set man was bothering Stephanie. He seemed too aggressive as he reached out toward her. I didn't think, I just acted. I must have run, but it all felt slow. Suddenly, I was behind him. I caught a glance at Stephanie's face. She didn't look scared. She seemed confident and was waiting for me to fix this. I grabbed the man by his shoulder, turned him around, and pushed him away with a strong shove. As he fell back, he accidentally bumped into my knee. He lost his balance and fell hard to the ground. I thought about going after him, maybe kicking him, but it didn't seem needed. He was clearly done. I turned back quickly to find Stephanie and hugged her tightly. She settled in, wrapping her arms around me. "Are you okay?" I asked gently, pulling back to see her face. She nodded and leaned her cheek against my chest, holding on even tighter. After a moment, I pulled my jacket off and draped it over her shoulders. Around us, there was a lot of chaos. People were asking what had happened, while others shared their stories. Not everyone had seen the event from the start, and soon the tales began to drift far from reality. I searched for Mercedes. She stood next to me, looking worried. Mercedes raised her phone. "I have it all on video!" she shouted. "I recorded everything. He tried to hurt Stephanie right here, and I caught it on camera." Her voice broke through the noise, quieting the crowd for a moment. I nodded and turned to Stephanie, catching Mercedes's eye. We started toward the wide staircase that led to the entrance we had come through. Just before we reached the first step, a very large man in a tuxedo blocked our way. "Mr. Mulvane would like to see the lady's phone, sir," he stated plainly and pointed to his left. There stood Mr. Mulvane. He didn't look very welcoming. He appeared worried and angry, his face showing he was not pleased. "No," I said firmly. "That's not going to happen." I tried to move past the large man, but he stretched out his arm and placed his hand on my chest to stop me. He glanced at Mercedes and made a gesture while still blocking me with his other hand. When I moved, he held my shoulder tight. "Look down," I said angrily. I was not in a friendly mood. He ignored me, confident that he was in control. I pressed the handle of my Glock against his stomach. "Look, down," I warned him. Finally, he glanced down, and to my surprise, he understood that things had changed. He wasn't really in charge. My hand was ready to act, and all I had to do was a gentle squeeze. The safety was built into the trigger, and I had already released it. "It's pointing up," I said casually. "If I start firing, I'm going to hit you right in the heart. Do you understand?" He nodded and raised his hands slowly to show me they were empty. "Do you have a weapon?" I asked. He nodded again. "It's small at my back," he said. "Take it out," I instructed. "Slowly, with your left hand, just your thumb and fingers." He carefully did what I asked, moving slowly. I reached across my body with my left hand and took the gun from his relaxed grip. I stepped back a little, keeping my weapon aimed at him the whole time. I heard gasps from behind me. It was the first time most people in the room realized I was holding a gun. "Lie down on the ground," I ordered. He didn't think twice and lay down right away. "Stephanie, Mercedes." I called the two women to my side and lowered my arm so my gun was aimed down. My finger was finally resting along the side of the gun. In no time, Mercedes, Stephanie, and I made our way up the steps, through the lobby, and out the door. I dropped the bodyguard's gun on a table in the lobby as we passed. An unsuspecting valet quickly brought our SUV to the entrance, and we drove away quietly. Everything went smoothly after that. No one stopped us. A few police cars sped past us a couple of miles down the road, all going in the opposite direction. They didn't even look at us. Our trip to McReady Airfield went without any problems. I had owned the airfield for almost a year, but I kept the name as it was. Many of my regular weekend visitors recognized the place by its old name, and they used it because they were familiar with it. Soon after we arrived, our SUV parked next to the hangar, and we got onto the twin-engine Cessna we had flown into the city. I began the takeoff while Mercedes and Stephanie were still putting on their seatbelts. 42 minutes later, we had landed safely and secured the plane. Shortly after that, we were back inside our ranch house. With our security system in place, we felt safe there. But that wasn't the end of it. By the next afternoon, detectives from the big city figured out who was involved. They worked with our county sheriff to come and talk to us. There were enough of them to form a 6-vehicle group that drove through our gates to the main house. The sheriff himself came to our front door holding his hat. He knew my dad was the sheriff of this county during some tough times, and many people still remembered both my dad and those days. So, when the current sheriff saw my dad at the door, he was very polite and respectful. Inside, Stephanie, Mercedes, and I gave the city officers written statements we had already prepared and answered their questions as long as they seemed to be genuinely trying to understand what happened. We also shared a video that Mercedes had recorded on her phone. But when the youngest detective asked a tricky question, one of our lawyers quickly shut down the questioning, saying that the three of us would not answer any more questions, now or ever, and he made sure that was kept in place. The young detective received several annoyed looks from his fellow officers. One of the officials with the group turned out to be from the district attorney's office, and she seemed to know all the lawyers I had brought in that morning. When a detective glanced at her with a question, she just shrugged. There was nothing she could change. She knew my lawyers were skilled, and they should be, given how much I was paying them. I hoped they would justify the expense. Another group of my lawyers was already in the DA's office, asking why the person who had hurt Stephanie wasn't already in jail and facing charges. 3 weeks and 4 days later, everything came to an end. The person responsible turned out to be Mr. Mulvane's youngest son. Mulvane attempted to defend his son's actions and even tried to blame Stephanie. Our lawyers quickly responded, letting Mulvane's team and the city's lawyers know they would take action against them in court for blaming the victim. Our lead attorney seemed eager to hold them accountable publicly. The Mulvane team began to back down, and once that happened, it quickly gained speed. Under pressure, the district attorney charged the young man with 3 serious crimes and several lesser ones. It turned out there were many videos of the event, and none of them showed the Mulvanes in a good light. In the end, the young man pleaded guilty to 1 charge and received a 6-month jail sentence, avoiding time in a Texas prison, but he still ended up with a felony on his record. The DA had originally wanted to be lenient with the Mulvanes and give him a lesser charge, but our lawyers made sure the local news was well aware of what was happening. The district attorney didn't win his job by a large margin in the last election. He didn't want a wealthy opponent supporting a strong law and order candidate in the next election. The DA's office tried to claim I had threatened someone with a weapon, but we argued that the bodyguard was the one using unlawful force, and I was just protecting myself. A video came out that showed what the bodyguard did, which cleared me of any wrongdoing. If he had actually taken Mercedes's phone, it would have led to other legal problems like theft and tampering with evidence. Luckily, the DA decided not to pursue any charges against me. My lawyers were not happy. They saw a chance to bill a lot of hours if the DA had chosen to move forward. Stephanie's case against the Mulvanes for creating a bad situation was settled quickly outside of court to avoid drawing more attention. Suddenly, Stephanie became a millionaire, and the Mulvanes even paid for her lawyer's fees. Our legal team returned to Dallas. I stopped spending so much on their services, and calm settled over our ranch. I thought this peace would last forever. A few weeks later, my parents came to pick up all 4 kids. Stephanie's little girl, Daphne, had long been accepted as one of my parents' grandchildren. They were heading off on a fun camping trip in my parents' big RV. I didn't really think sleeping in a nice RV counted as camping, but everyone has their own idea of fun. From the video call we had with them earlier that evening, it was clear the kids were having a great time. Mom and Dad couldn't stop smiling. Having 4 grandkids all to themselves, without any parents around, was Mom and Dad's idea of paradise. I was in bed, resting and enjoying the peace, free from any child-related emergencies that could pop up at any moment. Then, the hallway door opened, and Mercedes walked in. I was surprised. I thought she was in the master bathroom and should have come through that door instead of the hallway. I was even more surprised when Stephanie entered the room right behind her. Both women looked worried. "Matt, dear, we have a problem," Mercedes said seriously. I could almost hear Scooby-Doo saying, "uh-oh," in my mind. Mercedes sat on the bed to my right and took the remote control. Stephanie settled on the bed to my left, keeping her distance but looking beautiful. Mercedes turned on the DVD player, scrolled through the options, and picked a clip labeled simply, "Stephanie." It seemed she had it all ready to go. "Watch this," Mercedes said firmly. It was the video from the Mulvane incident. I knew it well. I watched as a guy stumbled around in front of Stephanie. Moments later, I came into view, grabbed the guy, and quickly handled the situation. I felt proud of how I managed to get him away without overreacting. It seemed like a sign of growth. All my lawyers were on board with what I did, too. It left no chance for the authorities to accuse me of anything. The clip ended with me bringing Stephanie back to safety. "Did you see that?" Mercedes asked, her voice full of emotion. I wasn't sure what she meant, other than the obvious. "I've seen it before, yes," I replied casually, unsure of what Mercedes was getting at. Mercedes restarted the video. "Look at what's happening here, Matt. See Stevie's face. Notice her eyes." I did as Mercedes played the video slowly. I didn't see much that I hadn't seen before. I sighed. I really wanted to add something to the conversation, but I had to give in. I didn't know what my wife wanted me to notice. Mercedes climbed up onto the bed, and I made space for her, moving closer to Stephanie, who was above the blanket and safe. My wife pointed the remote and started the video again in slow motion. "Do you see?" Mercedes almost whispered. "Our Steffi isn't scared of that guy. She's not even looking at him. She's looking at you coming to help her. Do you see?" Well, that seemed to be true. Stevie wasn't paying attention to the other guy. She did look like she was focused on me coming into view. She didn't flinch as I stepped in. When I turned back to her, she simply tilted her head up to meet my eyes, wrapped her arms around me, and rested her face against my chest. Mercedes rewound the video to where Stephanie was looking up at me and paused it. My wife leaned over and gave me a soft kiss. "Baby," she said gently. "Stevie wasn't scared. She knew you were coming to help her, and you did." She paused for a moment to let her words settle. "Honey, notice how she's looking at you? You can tell. My sister has strong feelings for you, and you know it," she finished. I took a deep breath. I couldn't argue with what Mercedes said. "And here's what Mrs. Stanley got with her phone," Mercedes added, stopping me from saying anything in my defense. Mercedes played another short clip. It showed me draping my tuxedo jacket over Stephanie's shoulders and hugging her close to comfort her. When the player finished, Mercedes stopped it, and I looked down at Stephanie. "And sweetie," Mercedes said softly, "you love her too." I didn't know how to respond. What she said was true, but I had been ignoring it for a long time. I couldn't deny what Mercedes was saying. The video made it clear. "Honestly," I started, my voice shaky, "I would never—" I paused, looking at Stephanie. I didn't want to upset her, but I needed to calm my wife. "Sweetheart," I tried again. "I could never betray you. I wouldn't do that." While I was figuring this out, Mercedes had been busy. She turned off the DVD player, dimmed the lights in the bedroom, and stood up. I noticed movement to my left. Stephanie was smiling at me. The two women came closer. Stephanie rested her head on my shoulder, and Mercedes leaned against me. "Sweetie," she whispered gently, "I know you would never be unfaithful. You just can't do that, can you?" "But," I tried to argue. "Shh, I understand." She reached out to comfort me. Both women smiled warmly at me. "Look at us, Matt," Mercedes said calmly. "No one here is being unfaithful. No one is doing anything wrong. No one is trying to hide anything. Everything is open and clear. Right?" Mercedes said kindly. Stephanie leaned in closer. "I love you, Matt," she whispered. "I've loved you for so long, and I always will." "See?" Mercedes said softly from the other side. "She loves you. I love her. She loves me, and I love you. And you love me, and you love Stephanie, right?" I do, yes," I admitted, and since this has all come to be, we need to fix everything. You see that, right?" "I didn't— Wait. How did I cause?" I protested. "I hadn't even been there." "Because he wasn't you, and didn't know how to be you," Stevie said softly. "And I didn't even realize I was looking for you the whole time. It wasn't fair to Danny, but I didn't know, so he never had a chance. I felt really sorry about that, but it was too late for him and me from the start." Stevie continued, sounding regretful. "But now I'm here with you and Mercedes, and I promise we will be the happiest three people in the world." I believed her, and I knew Mercedes meant it too. But I took a deep breath and let out a long sigh. It felt like defeat. "Do you know how complicated this is going to be?" I asked, knowing they weren't really listening, but I didn't mind because I enjoyed their company. Mercedes said happily from my right side. "Yep," Stevie added from my left. "But we'll work through it, baby. It'll be just wonderful." And mostly it was. We had our disagreements. Both women were strong and passionate, and I could be a bit stubborn myself, but we made a solid agreement to always communicate and never let things simmer. We never went to bed upset. Some nights we stayed up quite late, but we always resolved everything before turning off the lights. We shared deep connections, whether it was the three of us together or just two of us. When we spent time together, it felt right for two of us to focus on the other until everyone felt happy. I still loved to make the women happy, so while I was doing that, the other person would show care and attend to me, and then we'd switch. When we wanted to enjoy good company, we made the most of that time together. We agreed that the three of us needed a lot of time together, probably even more than most couples did. We found a solution to our problem by having Mom and Dad, along with our teenagers, watch the four kids regularly. My parents cared for all the children and enjoyed spending time with them. When Mom and Dad needed a break or had other plans, we asked Amber and Pamela to help with babysitting. They were paid well and really liked our kids. When Pam went off to college and Amber married a local guy in June, they recommended other girls in the area who could take care of the kids for a night or a weekend. There was always someone available, and we used their help a lot. Before the first of the kids started school, I adopted both Maddie and Daphne. Maddie was named after me. Mercedes' husband didn't know that and wouldn't have cared much. He had never wanted children and was happy to give up any parenting rights without needing much persuasion. Daphne's ex also agreed to let go of his rights because he wanted to focus on a new relationship. I was surprised when Stevie and Mercedes decided they wanted more kids. I thought 4 was enough, but they talked to me and changed my mind. Stevie had another daughter, and a couple of years later, Mercedes had a son. Then Stevie gave us a son, and Mercedes had another daughter. I loved all of them. My life is full of love from my ladies and all the children around us. Epilogue. I looked down the hill and saw my 19-year-old son, Tommy, and 2 of the older girls walking up to the big house, probably coming for dinner, even though they were a bit early for that. Mercedes offered me a glass of iced tea, and the 3 of us settled into the porch chairs to enjoy the coolness of the early evening. Tommy had grown into a strong young man, resembling me but with his mother's nose and serious eyes. 17-year-old Maddie was a lively look-alike of Mercedes, while 18-year-old Daphne had inherited Stevie's charm and beauty. Both Tommy and Daphne were already studying at Texas A&M, while Maddie would be starting there in the fall. My daughter Judy aspired to be a pediatrician and was studying pre-med at TCU. She was home with us for a few weeks between terms and was out in the backyard watching the younger kids play. I could hear their happy laughter and shouts. When I was a teenager, younger than our older kids now, my parents let me stay alone in the nearby house where the kids had just exited. I convinced Mercedes and Stevie that giving the older children some independence would help them become responsible grown-ups gradually. I felt my idea had worked out well. The 4 of them had made themselves at home. There were plenty of bedrooms in that part of the house, and everyone seemed content. The older kids enjoyed their freedom, which gave the adults some space to care for the younger ones. I appreciated not having to hear the strange music that the younger generation liked. I watched Tommy, Daphne, and Maddie walking up the path toward us. The field where I used to train was now just grassland. The 2 girls and Tommy were walking closely together. They stopped, and Tommy and Maddie faced each other. Young Maddie reached up and gave Tommy a warm hug. After a moment, they pulled apart, and Daphne took Tommy's hand again. "Well, that's surprising," I said. It was clear what our kids were trying to say. The young adults moved closer again. Tommy had one arm around Maddie and the other around Daphne. The girls wrapped their arms around him. Mercedes laughed beside me. "I told you he'd catch on eventually," she said, leaning over to talk to Stevie. Stevie giggled in response. "It took him a while, didn't it?" I realized I had missed a lot that was happening around me. "Dad," Tom said as the 3 of them came up to the porch. He seemed earnest, not challenging. The girls smiled warmly. I looked at them, trying to appear serious, but I couldn't manage it, so I let it go. "You all understand how tricky things might get, right?" I asked, meeting each of their gazes. I was hoping for a hint of embarrassment, but I saw none. "Yes," they answered together, smiling again. The girls went up the steps to join their mothers. "But we'll always have our moms and you to help us through the tough times, Daddy," Maddie said calmly. I let out a sigh. There was no use fighting a situation that was already set. Hey listeners, if you enjoyed watching this video and want to stay updated with our latest content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss out on what's coming next. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video with Queen Cheating Tales.